Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the movie part of What If Naruto Was Summoned by Queen. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. He's not one of the four. Is he a demi-human? I don't see a weapon on him. Who is he? He's waking up, say the line. Rise of a Fox. Oh, brave hero, please save our world. Blue eyes snapped open with a start, only to snap shut thrice as fast against the light. Three realizations dawned at once. First, this wasn't his room or his bed, for that matter. Second, his head ached abominably in the worst of ways. Third, the floor was dim and cold, and someone was speaking to him. What's all this now? Excuse me. He rasped out, pulling himself upright. What did you just call me? The last thing he remembered was working his way through village library. He'd been there researching something for an up-and-coming mission. Hadn't he? There had been a book with a red cover. He remembered that much, recalled opening it, and then everything went fuzzy after that. He couldn't recall. And why was his right arm so DMN itchy? Is this what I get for picking up that DMN book? For crying out loud, silence reigned supreme, and with it came a moment of fleeting, peerless panic. Kurama, you there? A low groan reverberated through the back of his mind. Wish I wasn't. What happened? Deno daring to open his eyes at last, the wayward warrior squinted against the pain to make sense of his surroundings. He found himself in a vast sprawling room made of stone. A single open archway spilled sunlight into the room, against which group of 5 robed individuals stood tall, 2 flanking 1 man on each side. That man, the leader, saw him move and made to speak again. Oh, brave hero, ouch, too loud, much too loud. I heard you the first time. Naruto flung up a hand to stave off another assault on his senses. Damn it, you're noisy, I've got a headache. A murmur of confusion ran through them. There is a long and complicated story behind this, their leader began in softer tones. But we've summoned you here using an ancient ritual. There were meant to be 4 of you, but 4. He looked over his shoulder and saw naught but smoke. Don't see anyone else, clearly something went wrong. The man finished with a grimace. However, when Naruto glared his way, he faltered and quickly bowed his head. Our world teeters on the brink of destruction. We beg you, oh brave hero, another bow now, all of them, low at the waist. Please help us. A bead of sweat ran down his brow. I'm sorry, could you start over? You heard them. They summoned you. Must be a jutsu of some sort. Hey! He turned his attention inward with a scowl. You're a part of this too, you cranky BS dirty. Much to my dismay. Is it took late for me to get another Jinchuriki? Naruto puffed out his cheeks. Sir Hero. He didn't much like the look in their eyes. 4 of the 5 were looking at him in awe, sure. But others, why did he sense negative intent from at least one of them? It didn't make a LCK of sense. And now wait just a second, he whirled to face his expectant summoners. You guys kinds brought me here out of the blue, how do I get back? The silence was telling. Naruto gulped into it. I can go back to my world, right? First we'd like you to have an audience with the queen of our country, Lady Melromark. The leader of the hooded summoners fidgeted yet further, either unable or unwilling to meet his question. You can negotiate your return after that, so please. Huh? Kurama made a bemused noise. Never met a queen before, aren't you being a little easygoing about this? Why shouldn't I be? Our world's peaceful these days with the war done, there are no threats for us to deal with back home. When he didn't challenge him, the old fox pressed on bullishly. I don't know about you, but been craving a little excitement for ages. This could be an interesting diversion of nothing else. You could at least stand to hear them out. A thorn of hesitation caught his heart. The elemental nations really were safe. With Kagaya's defeat had come peace, and there wasn't any danger on the horizon. Sure, he'd much rather be back with his friends eating ramen, but if these people needed help, it wasn't something he could ignore. But he raised his hands. All right. I give. Take me to your leader. They were more than happy to do so indeed. In no time at all they led him to a sprawling throne room filled with people. More than a few turned their noses up at him, again, for reasons he couldn't comprehend. There was again that faint feeling of distaste. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. His keen ears twitched, taking it in despite his best efforts to ignore it. Look at him. Only one hero. Doesn't have a weapon. Is he a demon human? Looks like one. Doomed, we're doomed, the waves will swallow us whole, one after the other, a blurring blend of words that assaulted both sense and confidence alike. A lifetime ago he would have snapped at them all, demanded they take back their whispers and apologize. Before the Fourth Shinobi War. Before so many things. Water off a duck's back. Had these insults ever bothered him as a kid? But these people were strangers, and not terribly friend ones at that. Why should he give a flying fig what they thought of him? He didn't concern himself with whatever petty prejudices they were trying to offload onto him. Say the word and I'll teach them a lesson. Now, he hummed under his breath. Didn't you want to hear the queen out? In the long view, none of their words mattered because he'd just found her. A lovely fair-skinned woman awaited him at the end of the chamber, seated upon a single throne. This then must be the queen. Another throne beside her lay curiously empty. He couldn't help but wonder at it. She certainly didn't look like she needed a king to rule with. Well, you know what they say about queens and kings. Striking violet eyes met his, framed by immaculately coiffed hair to match. A lovely crown decorated her flowing tresses, all red and gold with a single diadem at her forehead. Clad in an intricate royal gown he had no hope of describing, she was every bit what he thought a queen would be. Her very presence held an air of something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Stretching out his senses, he felt only boundless curiosity from her. She regarded him as one might a curious stranger from afar, which in a sense he was. I bid you welcome, honored hero. Her voice was smooth as honey, pitched to carry. I hope the circumstances of your arrival were none too sudden. He paused a stone's throw away, wondering how to respond to such kindness. In the end he gave up and settled for a shrug. I was a bit startled, but yeah, guess I'm kinda hungry. We shall see food prepared for you shortly. She tilted her head, considering him further, then. At length she leaned back in her throne, curiosity satisfied. You are not one of the four, it seems. Lady, I have no idea what you're talking about. He frowned then, considering her further. A queen she may well be, but he didn't know her name. Or who you are. I am Mir Eliaque, Melromac, queen of this kingdom. Her smile was soft, indulgent even. Might I have the pleasure of your name? Well, no point in being rude. Naruto Uzumaki. He crossed both arms behind his head and flashed her a winning smile. Nice to meet ya. Sir Naruto. Her lively eyes sparked. But you are a hero, yes? Kurama scoffed. That's putting it mildly. That reminder stung a little. A life full of deeds freely given flashed before Naruto's eyes. Was it wrong that he took pride in them? Just a little. He'd come so far. In truth, he'd been content with the end of his journey to one day become Hokage and possibly even start a family of his own, once he found that special someone. And yet something in him still longed for more. Maybe that was why he warmed to her words so. A hero. He scratched the back of his head, flushing a little. Sure, you could call me that. Excellent. The queen preened, leaving him with the strangest feeling. She'd been waiting for that very answer. I suppose I owe you an explanation. Folding both arms before his Naruto planted his feet and settled in to listen. What followed boggled the mind. An apocalyptic prophecy. Waves that would bring the world to ruin. A world that could and would end if someone didn't step forth to stop them. Hence the summoning and likewise his arrival here. This was not how he'd thought to start his week. But that was a lot to take in, that. He coughed once, then swallowed to clear his suddenly dry throat. That's why you brought me here. You want me to save the world? Kurama offered the mental equivalent of a shrug. We've already saved one. What's another? Yes. The queen's voice cut through their thoughts as a knife might through butter. I regret that my husband, the king, could not be here to greet you with me today, but he and my eldest daughter are preoccupied with other matters. Her tone suggested there was much more at work there had they done something to displease her. But it wasn't his business and thus he let it lay. Our country, Mel remarked, nay, the entire world is headed toward destruction. I get that, he thumbed his chin. But why me? Admittedly, the process can be a bit random, she confided in him. We do not so much choose which world the heroes hail from, that falls to the ritual. My husband would have us trust in the strength of our arms and face the first wave alone. Her fan flitted out, concealing the lower half of her face. I am not so foolish, thus we attempted the ritual. Keen eyes met his over that thin barrier. One hero for each nation. I had hoped we would summon the shield hero, but well, didn't he feel unwanted? You got me instead. Quite. The fan folded back with a snap, revealing a mildly concerned expression. I do not mean to speak ill of you, but it is too much to ask one hero to face the waves alone. I'm sure in time, the other nations will also attempt a summoning ritual, but extensive preparations and resources are needed for such. Really? His brow furrowed. The guys who summoned me said they were trying to summon 4 heroes. Hell, they seemed kinda disappointed they only got me. The silence that followed proved stifling. Is that so? Mirelia all but crooned, setting off every alarm in the back of his head. I'll be sure to have a nice, thorough discussion with the church. Her pinched expression said she'd be doing more than that. Or that said discussion would involve a great deal of shouting. Another entanglement he wanted no part of. Pardon my rudeness, but what kind of hero are you? Her question snapped him back to reality. I don't see a weapon with you, perhaps he doesn't have one. One of the nobles muttered blackly. Look at him, wearing those ghastly colors. A muscle jumped in Naruto's jaw. What's wrong with my outfit, you know? Outwardly he craned his neck back and opened his palm, wearing a smile that would have made Kakashi proud. Nope. No weapon here. You see, the fat fop sneered in return. Your Majesty, this man is a fraud. We should throw him in the dungeons. Idle Rabier, Mirelia interjected. You will be respectful, or you will be removed from this chamber. But my queen, he's just a demi-human. Look at his face. All eyes snapped to him. The queen's visage turned stormy. Not another word. This is your final warning. Naruto took the moment of silence for what it was, if only because it gave him a chance to look at his naysayer. A greasy little fat fop of a fool clad in dark frilly clothes, with messy blonde hair and a thinning mustache. He radiated negativity, and the WHP in his belt didn't do much to endear him to. Naruto disliked him immediately. He could feel the mood in the room shifting, curiosity turning to scorn. What was a demi-human anyway? It didn't exactly sound like a term of endearment. But he wasn't about to give him the satisfaction he sought. Shouting and screaming here would just make him look like an idiot. He fought gods and monsters. Lost friends and family. Blown his arm off and had a new one grown for him. A singed-squalling noble was hardly a threat compared to that lot. The people of this world probably weren't like a shinobi. If he punched Rabier, the idiot's head would probably pop right off. Satisfying though that might be, he couldn't murder a man for being a twat. Of course, that didn't mean he was about let this prissy little ponce have his way either. Well, I dunno what a demi-human is, and so he continued to smile unabated. But it wouldn't be much of a stretch to say I'm the weapon, you know. All the color drained from Rabier's face. That was the look, the expression of a man who realized his peril. Did I stutter? Naruto pivoted to face him with a pleased hum. What's wrong? You're looking kinda pale. Kurama perked up. Or are you being passive-aggressive right now? Guess I am. Didn't know I could do that. I'm so proud. The queen tilted her head, regarding him intently. You yourself are a weapon, you say? A murmur of disquiet passed through the court, echoing endlessly. Did he just threaten Duke Rabier? As expected of a savage. So uncivilized. Naruto ignored it all. He didn't need to convince this pack of people masquerading as nobility. Only the queen. He'd spoken the truth, from a certain point of view. After all, what was a Jinchuriki but a human weapon? His tools were his fists, his skills, jutsu. He did know how to use a sword and staff, but only in passing. Weapons were not, and likely never would be, his forte. He'd much rather use his own body to battle. Weapons could break. Blades could be blunted. But your fists, those never failed. Not when you regenerated as fast as he did. Come on, take the bait. Interesting. Their intrigue gleamed in Mirela's gaze. Would you care to demonstrate your skills? Gotcha. I'd be happy to. Naruto lifted his chin, grinning from ear to ear. Got anything you don't mind losing? There it was, the gauntlet flung down, the die cast, his will pitted against hers. Naruto half wondered if she would pick it up. Depending on her reaction here and now, he'd either stay or walk right out that door. She didn't disappoint him. The queen hummed her approval and placed her chin upon one hand, warming to the challenge. That smoldering gaze swept to a pair of servants lingering near the dais, lidded and intent. Fetch our finest suit of armor, a hand swept out. Quickly now. 2 servants scarpered and returned quickly, bearing a figure seemingly carved from heavy plate. In short order, it was placed before him. Naruto stepped forth to regard it. His reflection gazed back at him within polished ebony. It certainly looked sturdy enough. He could shatter this with a single punch, but he somehow doubted that would satisfy them. Conversely, a tailed beast bomb would be a bit much for this and not something to use indoors. That left the raisin shuriken out too, for that very reason. Which meant he turned to regard the queen. Mind a bit of collateral damage? Not at all. Mirelia waved a hand. Act as you see fit. Happily, blue eyes snapped into slitted scarlet, his body blazing gold on black as called forth his cloak. Several nobles cried out. He paid them no heed. His right hand swung upright, fingers clenched into a claw. Chakra pulsed in his palm, a sphere swelling to incredible size, so large it nearly brushed the ceiling of the vaulted chamber. A shadow swelled over. He heard rather than saw the towering Rasengan loom, experiencing the low roar as a familiar hum in his ear. So too did he hear their gasps. The screams. Someone might have squealed in fear. He had a good idea who. That arm crashed down, bringing the giant Rasengan with it. His target wasn't destroyed. Destruction implied that some piece of it yet remained. It ceased to exist. Dust and debris erupted upward from the point of impact, eliciting shrieks of surprise from those assembled. The floor buckled. In truth, it would have been worse if he hadn't held back at the last second. Even then, the crater he made was all but impossible to ignore. Oops. Maybe he should have restrained himself more. Hopefully they had a good mason on call. Think that got their attention. In the smoke that followed, Naruto felt a slight smile could be forgiven. Probably. Eventually the dust settled as all things do, and he found himself staring at a sea of astonished faces. Alright, maybe he did feel a little thrill of pride now, having silenced them. Sorry about the crater. He couldn't quite keep the cheeky smile from his face as his arms rose and fell in a shrug. Guess I don't know my own strength. Mirelia blinked at him with wide eyes. Twice. Thrice now. Finally she coughed into a fist and reclaimed her dignity. Yes, clearly, I don't believe it, a familiar, irritating voice squealed. It must be a trick. No demi-human could possibly have this kind of power. Red eyes rolled. Governor Rabier hadn't learned his lesson, it seemed. Perhaps he simply didn't want to believe. He was sure he could talk the governor into it if he wanted to. Therein lay the rub. He didn't. No, what he wanted to do right about now was something else entirely. Enough. The queen raised her hand. Was that frost glittering from her fingers? Lord Rabier, you were warned. Naruto held up a hand before she could act. Let me handle him. She quirked a brow. Another demonstration, then. He hummed. Something like that. Oh, is it my turn? Sure. Go nuts. Very well. She lowered her arm. Though I would ask that you not hurt him too badly until I can find a replacement. Idle Rabier shrilled. A replacement? But your grace. No worries. He stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. I won't be breaking anything but his spirit. The portly noble bridled. Don't you touch me, you filthyac. Oh, there would no touching here. Not on his part. Still sheathed in the cloak, Naruto opened the floodgates. His partner responded in an instant. Golden light burst from his body as his old friend took shape around him. A full manifestation would have crushed everyone in an instant, not at all what he intended. As he was now, it scarcely took a thought to accomplish a partial transformation. He didn't even have to touch Rabier, there was no need. Belief is a funny thing, little man. A low, guttural voice pervaded the throne room. They say seeing is believing, the queen gasped. Half of the nobles in attendance fainted dead away. Naruto didn't much blame them. Kurama's snarling maw did more to ruin Rabier than any physical attack ever could. A bristling snout, teeth and all, snapped down less than an inch from the governor's face. Hot, fetid breath warmed his face, promising death at the slightest provocation. Chakra or no, a giant monster's face in your face was the last thing anyone wanted to see. Least of all this one. Now do you believe? Beast, Rabier pitched back at the sight, eyes rolling in his head, frothing at the mouth. He say beast. He slumped over to twitch on the floor, one leg kicking spasmodically. Bah, it's no fun when they have a beast hero. The queen hummed as her guards dragged Governor what was left of him from the chamber. A fitting moniker. Not one of the four, yet clearly a hero nevertheless. She eyed Kurama's chakra skull warily. Might I implore you to put your friend, she gulped a little when Naruto nodded, away, please? He's frightening the others. Sure thing. Do you have command of beasts, then? All she received was a self-same shrug and a smile. Kurama withdrew into his stomach with a muted grumble. Only then did Naruto realize what he'd been labeled as. Wait, beast hero. He hadn't asked for that moniker, Kurama. A little help. Hell if I know, came the bemused reply. I've had my fun. All these terms are going way over my head. Right now, I'm trying to figure out what that icon in the corner of your eye is. A pause. What the hell is a status? All I see is screens. So many screens and level 1. The icon. What icon? Something to deal with later. He had another, more pressing question. So how long do I have until the first of these waves hit? A month? A year? Judging by the dragon hourglass. Here at last his host winced. Roughly a week. I believe that was yesterday. Oh. So he only had 6 days to prepare. Sure. Great. Plenty of time, only 6 days. Some of his distress must have shown through because she stood. Rest assured, we will not leave you to face this peril alone. Much to his chagrin, Mirelia actually rose from her throne and descended the dais. You have but to say the word and we will gladly fight alongside you. Did she mean herself or the kingdom? And when the waves are quelled and our world safe, she didn't walk towards him, she stalked, hips swaying, sashaying despite her gown. Once this madness finally ends, long strides devoured the distance between them, carrying her forward until she stood no more than a hand's breadth away. You will be able to return home, if that is still your wish at the time. Soulful violet eyes met baffled blue as she looked up at him. What say you? It is a fair offer. The faint smell of perfume rose to meet him, and Naruto found himself gulping despite himself. Close, way too close. Will you not help us, oh beast hero? Mirelia reached up and snatched his right hand in both of hers, holding tight, threading pale fingers within his. They were surprisingly warm. Think of the lives that will be lost. As he balked, she laid their intertwined hands against her cheek. The innocence that will perish if you refuse. I implore you, her eyes lifted, blinking up at him through long lashes, lend us your strength. She's got you there, kid. Naruto knew she was manipulating him. Even a blind man could see that. Benevolently perhaps, but pulling his strings still. By appealing to his pride and dignity among other things, she sought to persuade him to stay. She wasn't even being cruel about it, simply pragmatic. She wanted to protect her people. Nothing more. Nothing less. He could respect that. She wanted to see her kingdom survive, needed to protect all those under her purview. It wasn't done for selfishness, nor was it done for greed. And if she thought this would work, she'd be right, damn it. Surely it was all right. So long as she didn't try to make him do anything he did not want to do. If she thought he'd dance to her tune, well, he knew the steps. Sage knew he'd seen them often enough. Two could play this game his hand. Squeezed hers. You don't have to beg. Of course I'll help. The queen inhaled sharply, a pleased intake of breath that had those vibrant violet eyes going half-lidded. A tiny, almost imperceptible shiver raced through her. He only noticed it through their linked hands. Her emotions, once so clear and easy to read, suddenly became a tangled knot he couldn't comprehend. There was delight tinged with fear, a surge of pleasure, and above all a hint of anticipation. Why that last one? No, those weren't important right now. So what if others turned their nose up at him? Mirelia was begging for his aid. This country needed help. He was the only hero they had. What kind of hero would he be if he didn't answer the call? Come hell or high water, he would do his best. Thank you. Mirelia tilted her head just so. We are in your debt, my hero. Oi, oi. A blonde brow quirked at her turn of phrase. Your hero. The queen smiled. A slip of the tongue. Nothing more. Somehow, Naruto didn't think it was. How little he knew. Naruto suffered his first setback come morning. For you see, the kingdom of Melromac didn't have any ramen. Nay, not a single noodle to its name, not as he knew it. No Ichiraku ramen here, no suri. No broth, no miso, no chopsticks, nothing. It was a true tragedy, a travesty unlike any other, an unforgivable sin in every sense of the word. He'd not soon forget it. Point to the old BSRD. That wasn't to say breakfast wasn't good, of course, on the contrary, found it downright delectable really. He'd woken to a veritable feast, breakfast in bed. Fluffy golden eggs, rashes of bacon and more. The castle chefs knew their stuff. He'd eaten it all, heedless of their glares. Even if it wasn't his holy ramen, are you still sulking about that? Let me have this fur. You don't understand ramen. I really do, came the answering drawl. Sealed inside you, remember? I've tasted it before. Nothing to write home about, really. Heresy grumbling to himself, and ignoring such sacrilege, he continued his meandering path down the hall. Tan fingers traced a tapestry in passing, eyes roaming the wrought corridor with idle curiosity. It really was a nice castle, possibly the largest he'd ever seen, finely furnished with both help and staff alike. Now if only they weren't glaring bloody red daggers at him. More than a few servants regarded him with scorn. Rare was the sort who granted him a nod, much less a bow. He tried to ignore them. Left with more than to wander the halls at such an early hour, he'd chosen to familiarize himself with the castle as best he could. If there was going to be an attack, that implied a siege. Best to know the hill he'd chosen to die on and all that. Mirelia could always send one of her shadows if she needed him. Probably would too, once she realized he'd wandered off. She was perceptive like that. Mirelia, not the queen. He knew that tone. Yeah. What about it? Kurama's grin was of the sit-eating variety. Just her name. What about it? Oh, no. You're going to figure this out on your own. This is far too entertaining. You there, a regal voice called out to him, cutting through his reply. Hold a moment, I would have words with you. Against his better judgment, Naruto plastered a smile onto his face and turned to face the speaker. In short order, he found himself gazing upon a bearded man clad in regal robes. A crown decorated his thick gray hair, bearing a singular purple gemstone set within. He couldn't help but think such a thing looked gaudy on someone like him. $10 says he's the king. No bet, outwardly he kept smiling. Did you need something or? I am Alt-Cray Melromac XXXI, king of this land. The man drew himself up, preening like a peak CK. You are the beast hero, are you not? That's me. Naruto couldn't quite fight down the eye twitch that followed. By the sage, I hate that nickname. What would you rather be called, the golden hero? The healer hero? He died a little on the inside. Both of those sound better than beast. His smile was just a little strained when next he spoke. How can I help ya? A scowl wrought his face. You can leave my wife be and return from whence you came, demi-human. One could hear a pin drop in the silence that followed. And then, a vein pulsed in Naruto's temple. Wanna run that by me again, old man? Well, Kurama blew out a sigh. He's one of those, is he? Suppose it was too much to hope he'd be like the queen. Naruto planted both hands in his pockets. Physically, he didn't budge. Not so his mind. His gaze roamed the halls. Noted the sudden and abrupt absence of any and all servants. Not unexpected. The king had good timing if nothing else. He had chosen his moment well. There were none in the hall to challenge them, none to contest whatever was about to happen. They were, in every way, alone. All right, he yawned. I'll play. What's your problem with me? What do you think someone like you can accomplish with mere parlor tricks? His tone reeked of derision. Begone from my sight at once. The 3 heroes will be summoned soon, and I will not have you sully them with your presence. Well. Wasn't this one full of himself? Ain't there supposed to be 4? No. The king's face darkened. Only the sword, spear, and bow heroes matter. The shield devil deserves death and nothing less. Sounds like someone I'd get alone with, if someone like you hates him. If you will not leave, then know this. The man turned his nose up at him. I will be watching you. Stay away from my wife. After all, it would not do for you to have an accident. A blonde brow rose. Surely not. He couldn't be that suicidal. Was that a threat? Not at all. Merely a warning. Why do you laugh? Naruto doubled over with a hoot, clutching at his sides. Make no mistake, he was laughing. He couldn't help himself. It wasn't done out of cruelty or spite, he just found it so damn and funny. After all he'd seen and done, the gods he'd fought, the monsters he'd tamed, the idea of a mere monarch having any sort of power over was just that. Laughable. May I? Sure, have at it. He'd heard all he wanted to hear today. Just don't kill him. The SWs came easily, his mind receding as Kurama surged to the fore. Teeth gone sharp, eyes burning red. Naruto found himself aware of every instant, every moment. Even as he ceded control he could easily reclaim at any time. The king must have realized something was amiss. It had him stepping back, but too slowly. Far too slowly. There was no chance of escape, much less calling for his guards. Listen, little man. Kurama used his body to step forward, bringing himself well within spitting distance. You don't seem to understand, so let me explain the pecking order here. His head tilted, fangs flashing. You're about as intimidating as a rat in an empty larder. You dare. Hey look, you puff up like one too. I am the king of this kingdom. The monarch's face turned a fascinating shade of puce. I am in charge. Naruto knew what was coming before Kurama even said it. Sure enough, Kurama laid a hand upon Altcray's right shoulder. Clawed fingertips bit through the mantle he wore, ready to pierce his flesh. Do you feel in charge? Altcray's face drained of color, but only for a moment. You wouldn't dare. This kingdom would be nothing without me. He drew himself up, face twisting once more into a sneer. If you so much as scratch me, I'll see you clapped in irons, your name dragged. Through the mud no peace will be had you, no refuge, no fall. A spike of killing intent drove the meddling monarch to his knees, word gurgling in his throat. Firm palms clapped around his face, gripping each cheek in hand. He applied just a hint of pressure, twisting his neck at a vile angle. Not enough to break, but enough to cause him pain. That was all it took to turn his wicked words into squeals of terror. It reminded Naruto of a pig, fattened and ripe for the slaughter. Any sense of presence or any anger he might have manifested bled away as his head twisted. An odd tinny voice chimed in the back of the blonde's brain, distracting him momentarily. Unlocked new skill. Terror of death. Would you like to apply? Sure. Why not? Let's scare him a little. You may think you're necessary for this kingdom. Kurama leaned in, recapturing his attention as his face twisted in an eerie smile. And perhaps you are. However, to me. His forehead touched that of the quivering man before him, breath hot on his face. You're just a candle in the wind. I could snuff you out right now, there wouldn't be a thing you could do about it. The king opened his mouth, doubtless to call for his guards, only for those clawed palms to wrench his jaw shut. And unlike my partner, I don't mind dirtying my claws. They'll never find your body. Do remember that. It would be a shame if we were to have this conversation again. Seamlessly he dropped the king and walked away. When he inhaled, the faint smell of urine reached his nose soon thereafter. Kurama wrinkled it, tooting softly. Clean yourself up, man, that's no way for a king to behave. Only then did he release the reins on Naruto's body. A wordless whimper echoed behind him as they walked away, punctuated by the sound of rapidly retreating feet. The latter blew out a sigh. Did you really have to terrify him that badly? Yes. It was a powerful need, one I couldn't deny. You've been pretty snarky lately. What are partners for? Kurama was better at playing the villain than him, he just didn't have it in him to terrify someone like that. Strange voice aside, this worked out. Hopefully the king would leave them be after this. He best if he knew what was good for him. Surely he'd let this be. Only an idiot would try to cause him and Kurama trouble after an act like that. But that voice not heard that before. Where had it come from? On a whim, he turned his thoughts inward. Hello? Anyone there? Error. There is no skill called hello. Please try again. What the hell was that? A shadow stirred in the edge of his vision, cutting him short. Lord Hero. Pivoting, Naruto beheld a masked woman in black knelt before him. The queen wishes to speak with you in her chambers. Pretty sure she does, after that stun. Tucking his thoughts away, he palmed his face. Alright, time to face the music. There was a pause. The queen's shadow frowned. What stunt do you speak of? Mirelia looked good in armor. Really good. Downright fantastic, really. Such was Naruto's first thought as he laid eye on her. He had a remarkable view from behind as her servants helped fasten it on. Gone was the gown of state. In its place she wore glistening steel set strategically over tight black and gold cloth. It was light armor all told, just the sort one might wear to effect adequate protection while still retaining full freedom of movement. Better than full plate to be sure, but still, he couldn't help but wonder why she was armoring up in the first place. His guide made a pleased noise as she let him in. It would seem she wishes to join you today. Naruto's head whipped her way. Her masked eyes betrayed nothing, but he glimpsed the ghost of a smile upon her lips. A true leader leads from the front, as they say. A strange feeling stirred in his as his gaze swung back to the queen. He'd never really paid attention to the fairer SEC before, not back in the village, never given them more than a cursory thought. He simply hadn't the time. There were always missions to complete, Sasuke to save, and promises to keep. But now, he couldn't stop staring. There was just something about her, that dignified mien perhaps, that drew the eye. No more than that. He'd noticed it before when she'd called him her hero earlier. He'd thought it a joke. It very well might be. But still she knew he was looking. Had to be. Didn't she have any shame? He could feel his face burning, but he just couldn't bring himself to look away. But there you are. Don't move, I'll be just a moment. She knew as he looked on aghast. The queen craned her neck, a lively purple eye flashing over her shoulder. Her eyes held his. Her smile was content, preening even, before she looked away. She did not shout like some, did not shriek, did not demand that he leave. She simply stood there, arms out, and allowed her servants to finish lacing up her corset and breeches. She cared not a jot that he saw. She stood tall and proud, as though daring him to find even the slightest imperfection in her body. There was none. Not at all. Hey, Kurama. The fox sounded far too smug. Something on your mind? Naruto bit back an anxious gulp. I think I have a thing for older women. Oh. Did she awaken something in you? Ah, shut up, she's married. To a king who's proven himself both craven and a coward. He wants us gone, and I'm convinced he'll try to make trouble for us down the line. His partner had that tone again. He knew at once what he was plotting, spiteful old kitsune that he was. Marriages can be annulled, they often are, where royalty is concerned. Naruto winced at that. Kurama, yes, he tries to take our life. We take his wife. He sputtered right back, cheeks darkening. I'm no homewrecker. Doesn't look that way to Menet if she's letting you watch her get dressed. What does it matter? Leave it to the demon fox to be the literal devil on his shoulder. The king hates you. The nobles of the court dislike you for making a fool of Rabia. If they've already made up their minds to hate you, to hell with them and what they think. Thank you for coming. Mirelia's voice wove itself into his thoughts, startling him out of his reverie. Did you enjoy your breakfast? Fully dressed at last, she pivoted to face him, armor clinking softly with movement. A rapid brink brought him back to reality. Yeah, it was fine. Truly. Her right shoulder slumped a little. I didn't know what you might like, so I'd asked the cooks to make a bit of everything. Naruto felt his visage convulse in a full facial twitched. No wonder they'd been giving him the evil eye this morning. They'd thought him a glutton. That was a rumor. He didn't want getting around. The queen must have seen his chagrin because she stepped to him. There is no need to hold your tongue. Her fan flitted out, sheltering a small smile within. We are alone here and I am not so indolent as you might think. Are you trying to show off for me? My, that bloody accessory surely hid the small smirk she wore. I'm pleased you think so, but no, I simply wish to make you comfortable and show you what our kingdom has to offer. A blonde brow rose. By getting dressed right in front of me. I am a queen. She lifted her chin, daring him to object. I have nothing to hide. She wasn't going to come out and say it, then. Troublesome woman. Alright, I'll bite. What's with the armor? I'm so very glad you asked. She took his arm in hers and steered him toward the door. Come, we can talk while we walk. Naruto opened his mouth to protest, saw the look in her eye, and thought better of it. They moved together but tactfully, him well beside her, neither in front of nor behind her. Nor did she press her bosom against his as some slattern might. She proved herself the very picture of decorum. It was something of a relief, actually. He'd thought she might throw herself at him or worse, but no, she seemed content to dance about him a while, yet for reasons he didn't understand. How are you finding your stay in our fair kingdom thus far? Well enough, I guess. His anger burned through his smile, and her felt her arm tighten around his. I met the king. Guess you could say he hunted me down. Mirelia made a noise caught somewhere between a sigh and a snarl. Yes, I thought he might have something to say. Unfortunate. I had hoped to better prepare you for him, but it would appear he's made the first move, clumsy though it may be. Well, her eyes held his again, demanding answers. What did he say? The truth, if you please. Well, Naruto scratched the back of his head. He doesn't much like me. Her pale face became stormy indeed. Elaborate. Naruto told her in no uncertain terms. I see. You remind him of the shield hero, no doubt. The weight of her regard was cool, but not cold. It came with the gentle promise of frost before the morning thaw. Pay him no mind. I will speak with him. He shan't trouble you again. Something told him it wouldn't be that easy. And if he does, then you may deal with him as you see fit. She steered him past a pair of bulking servants. Regardless, I will be accompanying you today. Naruto caught himself nodding, then balked. Yes, sure, great what? He'd forgotten all about that. Where did you think I was taking you on a morning stroll? Mirelia released his arm as they reached a set of wrought iron doors and flung them open herself belatedly. He realized he'd let her see him right to the castle entrance. Not a single guard in sight. He wasn't sure if he should be amused or alarmed. She'd planned this and kept him distracted until she was ready to spring her trap. Clever woman. He'd do well to be wary of her. There was no telling what she might do. I am not the sort to stand idly by while my nation is in peril. She turned to face him fully, sunlight silhouetted against her back, framing a subtle smile. If nothing else, today will help you gain a better understanding of your newfound abilities. Well, he was curious about this skill thing. She offered him her arm anew. Shall we then, my hero? Aha, a triumphant little voice crowed in the back of his brain. She said it again. I knew we weren't imagining things. It wasn't long before they reached their destination. Any other time, Naruto would have been more than happy to stop and see the sights, even further acclimate himself with this world, but he simply didn't have the time. With the wave only 5 days away, every second was precious. Perhaps that was why Mirelia drove him onward. Together they made their excuses, waved when folk called out to them, ignored the catcalls, and otherwise hastened on their way. There would be days to sightsee and get armor later. For now, time to grind. In the end, Mirelia brought him to a grassy knoll not far from the gate, just off the main thoroughfare. The sight didn't quite take one's breath away, but it was a peaceful vista nonetheless. Rolling green hills trailed out as far as the eye could see, tapering off into flowing plains lined by fields of wheat and corn. Naruto inhaled deeply, eyes drifting shut for the merest of moments. He'd known he was far from home, but seeing it firsthand, this really ain't our world. There are weak monsters here, known as orange uns. Mirelia flung out a hand, indicating a swarm of bouncing orange spheres even now bounding their way. They'll make for fine fodder. Please attack them at your leisure. They should break in a single hit. Even my youngest daughter, Melty, would have no trouble with such. Naruto couldn't help but perk up a bit at that. You have kids. He'd recalled her mentioning such, but it had slipped his mind until this moment. Kurama muttered something under his breath, a phrase he didn't quite catch. The hell was of? 2. The queen did not preen as he'd expected her to, but rather, appeared chagrined. Melty takes after me, but Malty then the monsters were upon them, stealing her words away. Allow me. Mirelia stepped past him, tilted her head back, and swept out a hand. A current of frost danced at her fingers, just as it had yesterday. This time, she didn't cease her spell. Frost flashed beneath her feet, breath emerging as a rising cloud of purest steam. As the source of thy power, the queen orders thee, her voice intoned in a low contralto, stern and uncompromising, regal even in its declaration. Decipher the laws of creation, surround my targets in a cage of ice and capture them. With her words, the temperature plummeted. All drit fall icicle prison, at her command torrent of hoarfrost sprung up to ensnare the encroaching monsters, freezing the bulk of them solid in a towering spire of ice. Naruto flung up an arm, wincing only a little as frost shot up his sleeve. He, at least, was able to endure. Not so the monsters. Defeat was instant. A few stragglers remained, made sluggish by the cold and the imprisonment of their kin. There you have it. Mirelia preened. Naruto padded over to one of the survivors, humming a little. They looked so harmless now one bounced right into his palm when he held out his hand. Little more than an orb the size of his head, it had no arms or legs to speak of, only glaring eyes and a toothy maw made for biting. Alright, maybe that last bit was a little worrying but still. It wasn't as though they could hurt him, right? Hell, it seemed downright placid as he d its smooth skull, almost purring wait, it was not bad. Seriously, he grumbled. Next thing I know, you'll be telling me I can actually tame beasts. Silence followed. Can I? Confirmed. As though waiting for that very moment, the same voice he'd heard before returned. Unique skill tamer has been gained. That voice again, Kurama. Do you hear? Hear what? I don't hear anything. Was he losing his mind? Why was he the only one who could hear that voice? Still seems a shame to hurt him. He muttered. Strange, Mirelia murmured in kind. Ordinarily, they're quite aggressive. The orange purred as he patted its head. Looks harmless to me. The queen made an exasperated noise behind him. Naruto, I wouldn't underestimate them. Hey, he looked over his shoulder with a grin, inadvertently taking his eyes off his new pet. You finally said my name, mistakes were made. He didn't see the gleam that flashed through the monster's eye, but he did sense the spike of wild intent. Almost felt like jealousy, that, though he didn't know why. It was right in his hand. There was no time to dodge. Darkness fell over his vision. A beat of painful silence passed through the plains, accompanied by a dry breeze. Neither Shinobi nor Queen spoke. At length, one of them finally sighed. It's biting my head, ain't it? Can't see a dimmin' thing. Mirelia snorted. Naruto heard her, even with half his face obscured. It was a sharp, unladylike sound, and it instantly endeared her to him even more. By the time he reached up and pried the naughty little monster free from his face, he saw her, laughing outright, a great heaving guffaw that had her doubling over and clutching at her sides. It trailed off into a choked giggle once she realized he was staring. Pardon me. She didn't have her fan with her, but she still concealed her smile behind a palm. I didn't mean to laugh at you. I simply couldn't help myself. Are you unhurt? Fine. He tucked the snarling under his arm, heedless of its attempts to escape and bite the queen. Hey, I don't mind. Makes you seem more approachable, you know. Oh. When her eyes flashed, Naruto knew he'd made another mistake, albeit one that might have altogether more pleasant consequences if he pursued it. Do I seem so distant to you? Not distant, he hazarded a shrug, just more human to me now. Kurama whistled. Now you've done it. Want me to put some flowers on your grave? Then what did you think of me before? Mirelia cooed, voice gone silken with menace. By all means, enlighten me. Now in all fairness, Naruto knew very little about the female psyche, but he knew a loaded question when he heard one. He wasn't treading on that landmine. I don't think it's in my best interests to answer that. How wise of you. Another giggle lilted through the air, much more pleasant than the last. You can use your brain when you wish to. Am I being tested? In a sense. Mirelia didn't LCK her lips, but the way she looked at him made him feel like a juicy steak. You pass, by the way. Diamond, she's thirsty. What, for water? A tall glass of hero, apparently. His new ally bit at his side, earning a growl. Stop biting me. Much to his disbelief, the orange un did just that. It complied wholeheartedly. What was once an irritating gnawing ceased entirely, even if the little bugger didn't let go of his hand. Why was it looking thin like that? Kurama drawled in understanding. So that's this skill. Does a tiny notification flicker in the right corner of his vision. Looking at it caused it to expand. On cure, the tinny voice returned. Female un, level 1, successfully tamed. Status pet. 2 slots remain. So you're able to tame beasts to some effect, then. Mirelia touched one hand to her cheek, a faint smile plucking at her full lips. As expected of the beast hero. Naruto wrinkled his nose. Expected, not so much. Useful. Very, even if the little orange continued to gum on his arm. Stop it, you're getting my sleeve all wet, the queen laughed anew. It likes you, she. He couldn't stop himself in time. A blink. She. Naruto offered a self-same smile and shrugged to hide his mounting embarrassment. Well, that's what it says on the screen, so guess I should name her. Golden eyes glared up at him. How's orange sound? It bit him again. Ow? He recoiled with a yelp. Okay, just give me a second. Another word for orangering. How about amber? The biting abated, and the creature pet made a pleased noise before tucking itself into his side. As he looked on aghast, the screen changed yet again, the words female un replaced with the title he'd just given his unlikely ally. Maybe this skill and status stuff ain't so bad after all. Curious? Mirelia granted him a nod and paced past him. This is an intriguing development, but you will need to form a proper party eventually. She looked back, a hint of regret touching her lovely face. As much as I might like to, I cannot accompany you every day. His spirits wilted. Great, more people. More responsibility. Naruto whined, grimacing at the implications. To have to... Yes, she whirled to face him, eyes blazing. It would not do for me to monopolize your time. I'm fine with that, he raised a hand. By all means, monopolize away. Careful, she glanced at him through half-lidded eyes. If you keep talking to me like that, I just might... Your Majesty, there you are. A sharp cry had them turning, in time to see a phalanx of armed and armored riders approaching. They'd sallied forth from the gate in a cloud of dust. Well, he'd known their little excursion wouldn't last forever. Any half-decent guard was bound to notice Mirelia's absence sooner rather than later. Boo! He heard her hiss under her breath. Just when it was getting good. I suppose I shall call it here for a day, or we could give them the slip. Her gaze fastened to his. Would that be wise? Probably not, but we've just gotten started. I don't want to stop here. Be that as it may, she dithered but a little. I highly doubt you can outrun mounted cavalry. Horses. He could run circles around them, but he didn't want to hurt the poor beasts more than he had to. An impish grin touched his lips. Well, I can, but I can also think of a way to spook them. Just stand right there for a second. Wait, what do you mean? Her words peaked into a startled shriek as Kurama's full, towering form manifested around them in all its golden black glory. The approaching guards cried out and fell over themselves. Mounts reared. Riders crashed out of their saddles, scrambling back, all trying to get away from the sudden demon looming large over their fair city. Even more so when said beast crouched down and let 2 humans climb onto his back. Here, this is faster. Naruto held out a hand. Hop on. The queen blinked up at him, mouth agape, eyes wide. Finally, she recovered and clambered up after him. Her arms settled around his waist and held tight, body nestled against his. Heat shot up the back of Naruto's neck again, but he hadn't the time for it because then Kurama was moving, bounding forward, racing across the plains at breakneck speed. He smiled despite himself. Of course he wouldn't be content to wait. He never had been before. Ayuhao. Mirelia's gaze practically sparkled, voice rising to be heard over the wind. How did you summon such a thing? Lady, came the sigh, you ain't seen nothing yet? She took one arm fro his waist to run a hand over Kurama's coat, stroking a giant ear. So warm Fluffy, you great. You flipped her SW. Naruto wouldn't notice until later that night. He'd gained 2 levels by taming a single monster. You call me a beast, yet you're the one acting like a monster. It's almost sad. Wildside the next day brought its fair share of surprises. Thankfully, most proved pleasant. Most of them. First and foremost, Naruto discovered that his pet had something of a teething problem. Amber liked to bite. She liked to bite a lot. He couldn't even blame her for it lacking arms and legs. It was the only way for the little Uin monster to interact with the world. Biting was the way she conveyed affection, anger, even sorrow. She's gnawing on you again. Naruto hid a rueful smile behind one hand. I noticed, judging by the angry noises she was making as she tried and failed to eat his hair, he could only assume she was hungry. Again, not unexpected. He'd gone up 2 levels overnight. Amber had leaped through 3. All that from gnawing on the bedroom furniture, greedy little glutton. Small wonder she was starving. And was it just his imagination, or was she a bit bigger than before? Shrugging, offered her a bit of bacon from his plate. Eat this. It's gotta be better than ouch. His words peaked into a laugh as she chomped down on his finger and slurped up the greasy goodness. Still holding onto his hand with her teeth, she made him lever her down onto the table. A quick hop brought her to his plate. Golden eyes sought the pancakes and eggs there. Took head up to his. Back to the food again. She waiting for his permission. That's actually kinda adorable. He conceded the battle as lost. Dig in. I can always order more. Amber didn't need any further encouragement. She descended upon the food. There were no survivors. Hungry, aren't you? Naruto considered the little orange Uin he'd tamed. So you can level up too. Wonder if there's a limit. He poked her with one finger, earning a pleasant hum from his ally. You gonna stay this way forever? Think you'll evolve? Amber caught a finger between her teeth and nodded happily. Is that a yes? She made a noise that sounded vaguely like an assent. He couldn't be sure. He didn't even try to decipher the noises she made. Blue eyes sought a baffled servant with graying hair near the door. Yeah, we're gonna need seconds. And thirds. But my lord, that's a monster. The man protested, of course. Why feed it? Because she's mine. Amber made a pleased noise at that. Almost like she understood. But it's a wild animal. A blonde brow rose. And your point is? The man stiffened, looking like he wanted to protest. A flat stare put paid to that and sent him scampering. That gave him time to focus on others' things. He was gradually getting the hang of all these menus and screens, but that voice from before had proven itself quite silent thus far. He'd take that as a blessing, since most of this hardly made sense. Kurama wouldn't stop grumbling about that last bit. According to this, our stats are off the charts, but why? Why am I at level 1? I should be at least 100 times that. Naruto slapped his forehead, then apologized when Amber whined. That's what's bothering you. His eyes flicked toward another skill on screen. What's this, some kind of passive? He squinted it further, then frowned at what he found there. Attracts enemy monsters in battle. I'm gonna get swarmed. The monsters like you. They probably won't kill ya. Reputation might take a hit, though. He was greeted with more somber news after breakfast. Somebody tried to poison the king. They did not try. Mirelia didn't look back at him as her servants held her out her armor. She remained the very picture of poise in the mirror, unflinching, uncaring as countless hands grappled with cumbersome altar and steel plate. They succeeded. He is currently Abed. Oh, Amber made a pleased noise atop Naruto's head. Kurama offered the vulpine equivalent of a shrug. Naruto was half tempted to agree with his partner on that front should he feel bad. He hadn't gotten along with the king. But to wish death upon him just because of a disagreement. He wasn't that petty. Not yet. This world was starting to change him, and he wasn't sure if it was for the better. Did he die? The queen looked back over her shoulder at him. He yet lives for the time being. The Church of the Three Heroes is most displeased. Her violet gaze held his, and Naruto wasn't sure he liked what he found there. Heedless of the tension, Amber hopped off his head and plunked down on a nearby cushion. Within moments she'd made a nice little nest for herself and fallen fast asleep. "Don't look at me." Glowering at the queen, Naruto held up his hands. "I didn't do anything. If I wanted the old BS dead, he would be just that." He snapped his fingers, producing an audible pop. "Dead? He ain't, so it wasn't me. If you think I did it, I do not." Mirelia silked her tongue in mild admonishment. Her eyes sought out her shadows. "Leave us." The masked women obeyed quickly, leaving them alone. Was it his imagine, or had he seen a few smiles there? No, surely that was just his imagination. "Help me with this too, won't you?" Mirelia lifted her arms, offering him her corset. "I'm afraid I can't get out of this, and really, there's no help at all." Naruto's throat ran dry. "You're having me on, aren't you?" She looked at him over her shoulder. Long lashes blinked. "Am I?" He sighed and stepped to her warily, not sure what to make of the look in her eyes as he approached. Even a blind man could see what she was up to. A wise man would have made his excuses and bowed out, heedless of the scornful looks or the words that followed. He'd never claimed to be a wise man. With wary fingers he set to work on the strings binding her corset. Had to be careful. She wasn't wearing anything else up top there. "You know, you really don't have to wear armor all the time. I would sacrifice everything for this kingdom." She tossed her head and pushed a strand of hair from her eyes. "My comfort included. But not all sacrifices need be painful or unpleasant." "Ain't saying you're unpleasant," he muttered, fiddling with the string. "Hold still, will ya?" She was silent for a moment. And then, "Are you a—" The question absolutely floored Naruto. Only a short time ago he would have jerked back with a sputter. Face burning, eyes wide, he would have spat and swore and fled like a coward. He wasn't numb to this, but the endless decaring and politicking in this odd world had given him thicker skin. His eyes widened a little, nothing more. "Where's that coming from?" "You are then." She looked over her shoulder, reading him like a book, the clever girl. "I confess myself surprise. With your skill set, I thought you'd have maidens beating down your door. You had suitors, did you not?" She was probing him, but there really wasn't much to reveal on that front. He had nothing to hide after all. Nope. He willed himself not to look away as he undid another string on her corset. "There really wasn't anyone back home. Even if there were, I never really had time for you know." Rather than finish, he chose to trail off instead. Nad let her make her own assumptions. Probably for the best. "A pity." Her tone dipped a little. "You were a hero in your world, no doubt." Now there was a leading question if ever he'd heard one. Still, he could hardly deny it. "I guess." In truth, he'd never given it much thought. "I fought for my friends. My family. Did what I felt was right." His brow furrowed as he tugged out another knot. "Really, I got lucky and I had a lot of help. We still lost people, good people." She gasped a little as he pulled a bit too strong. "Careful, I felt that." "Sorry." He pursed his lips and teased another knot free. "Like I said, never really gave much thought to other stuff. Wasn't time for it." "There's time now." Mirelia turned abruptly and he lost his grip on her corset. It slipped from his grasp to pool at the floor, bearing her upper torso him. "Don't panic. That's what she wants." Resist heat rose in his cheeks. "Oi, cover up, whatever for." She planted a hand on her hip. "I've nothing to hide. You really are blunt, aren't you? I believe in speaking my mind." She crossed both arms before her bosom. It did lovely things to her. "Does that irk you so?" Did it? He liked people who spoke their minds, just as he loathed those who lied to themselves. The Queen Mirelia had been nothing if not honest with him so far. He appreciated that more than he could possibly put into words. It put her head and shoulders above the nobles here. She'd been nothing if not accommodating, but for the life of him, he couldn't see why she was too damnably interested in him. He wasn't anyone special, at least he didn't think of himself as such. "No, it doesn't bother me," he admitted at last, keeping his eyes on hers and nowhere else. "You're honest. I like that." A soft smile touched her face, lighting her eyes. I'm glad to hear it. Tell me what you want. Yet another question he wasn't prepared for. Queen, say what now? To send you home empty-handed after you save our world is a poor reward indeed. She stepped to him with a sway in her hips, and it took everything he had not to give ground. So tell me, a pale hand touched his left arm, tracing his bicep. What is you longing? Her words were warm on his face, and he thought he caught a hint of wine on her breath. It would explain today's particular brand of boldness. Well, fame, power. His brain took one look at her and committed swift, bloody mutiny. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Now who's the honest one? Double DMN. Naruto bit his tongue strong enough to see stars, but it was too late to take back what he'd said. He'd never really wanted anyone before. Never had an interest. Still, he wasn't a SLV to his emotions. Mirelia wouldn't lead him easily, and if she tried, he'd make her work for it. Right now, I want to fix this world. He chose the words that followed with infinite care. That's all. As to what comes after, I don't know. Oddly enough, that seemed to please her. A hero through and through. Truly, we were blessed to summon you. And here I thought you might give in. He bridled a little. Did she really think he was that weak-willed? I ain't a homewrecker, lady. Laughter bubbled out her, a short, sharp bark of bitter amusement. While I appreciate the sentiment, my hero, and here Mirelia favored him with a small sad smile, I'm afraid there's nothing left of my family for you to wreck. How did one respond to that? Alt Cray wasn't always like this. She traced his arm again, face gone pensive, lost in some distant memory he couldn't decipher. The last war was HRD on him. It poisoned his mind and he lost family to it. He wasn't quite the same afterward, certainly not so petty. And this guy's the father of your children. Contrary to popular belief, fatherhood has not made him a better man. Mirelia swatted his arm when he made to protest. He's fallen far from his former greatness. Multi has not helped in that regard. Her ring finger lacking said ring whirled a circle just over his palm for a moment before she comported herself enough to speak again. If you say you didn't poison him, I believe you. Just like that. Indeed. Her smile returned, but this time it held a worrying edge. Alas, it seems he won't be able to carry out his duties in his present state. Such a shame. An ugly thought occurred to him then. He gave voice to it a moment later. You had him poisoned, didn't you? Another laugh, this one lighter than the last. No. I was tempted to have him removed from the equation, of course, but not in such a fashion. Her words rang true to his sixth sense. She wasn't telling a lie, or at least she believed such. I suspect he dosed himself in an attempt to cast blame at your feet, perhaps to frame you for a crime you didn't commit and drive you from the capital. Doubtlessly he has an antidote prepared for such a ruse, one he must have taken soon thereafter to ensure he didn't suffer overmuch from any side effects. His hackles rose in the same instant. Sounds like something he'd do, unfortunately, and here Mirelia's fiery smile belied her true nature, for it was an utter contrast to the element she called her own. Alt Cray, for all his vaunted intelligence, made one fatal mistake. She touched a palm to her cheek and tilted her head just so, eyes flashing in the gloom. Would you like to know what it was, hero? Naruto risked a nod, although he had the distinct feeling she would tell him regardless. Tell me. She did so happily. It's simple, really. He tried to take away what was mine. Kurama offered a low whistle. Naruto nearly choked himself. Hers. He disagreed, but she was on a roll. Which is why I spiked his antidote with something else. Mirelia continued unabated. I suspect he's suffering rather painfully at this very moment. For the third time today, Naruto found himself brought him up short. You what? Now hold on. Her eyes met his, half-lidded with intent. You might have misheard me. Mirelia's smile proved prime and proper, the very picture of a queen, but the intent behind her words was so much black ice. I did give him half the dose, not some arbitrary percentage. I gave him. She stepped in, pressing herself against him, breasts crushing against his knee as she looked up at him. The hardest drag my shadows could possibly procure. It won't kill him, of course, not unless he has a particularly weak constitution, but he'll be a raving madman wishing for death these next few weeks. Ain't that a bit cruel? Is it? Her slim shoulders rolled in a shrug. If he survives, he might emerge a wiser man. If not, well. At last she looked away. I gave him no shortage of chances to improve long before you were summoned to this world. I warned him time and again to mend his ways. Yet he overstepped his bounds in spite of those warnings. He clung to the last bastion of reason. He's still your husband. Is he? A dark host of emotions flashed across her face. What were his words? This kingdom is nothing without him. Pa Melromark is a matriarchy under the rule of she who holds the highest authority. In other words, the queen. A finger jabbed his suggestii, tracing his ribs. No other. If he thinks himself the only power in these lands, he is sorely mistaken. He gave me the perfect opportunity to take him off the board, if only for a time. How could I let such an opportunity pass me by? He had to take control of this conversation before it went somewhere he wasn't prepared to go. So now. Mirelia warmed to the change. That was his first realization that he'd fallen into her trap. Now I rule without his meddling, though I wouldn't say no to a suitable replacement while he convalesces. Left unsaid was the chance he might not. Her gaze pinned him. Naruto bristled and flailed his hands. I ain't no king. The queen's brow climbed into her hair. Truth be told, I was content to settle for prince consort. Aren't you an ambitious one? Very well. I'll allow it. I'm sure my daughters will adore you. A pause. Well, Melty won't mind, but Malty best if she knows what's good for her. Kurama all but howled with laughter. Would you look at that? All that work and she still played you like a fiddle. Wanna dance a jig while you're at it? What the queen wants, the queen gets apparently. Still he couldn't give up that easily. We'll have to put off the public crowning, of course. Mirelia took him by the hand before his protest could build steam. The wave takes precedence. A small, private ceremony perhaps. Speaking of small, I understand you wish to tour some of the outlying provinces beforehand and make sure they're defensible. He did, and she was trying to keep him off balance. It was working. Brilliantly so. Well, yeah, but can we circle back to what you just said? Certainly. You can have as many consorts as you wish, of course. Her smile was warm as magma, but I will be your unforgettable first. Worry not. I can be patient. She reached up to his cheek, delighting in the way he unconsciously leaned into her touch. This can be perfectly pleasant for the both of us. Her other hand came up, cupping his face completely. Do you not find me attractive? Naruto stilled his tongue for good reason. Danger, minefield ahead, all brain cells on deck, avoid, dodge, evade. Do you really want me to answer that question? She purred. I would hear it said yes. Fine. You are. You're also married, not for much longer if I have any say in it. Much to his chagrin and anticipation, Mirelia pressed in, touching her forehead to his, bringing with her the faint scent of melting frost. We could all die in less than a week. Her eyes sought his, even as one leg moved to entangle with his own, while her arms looped behind his neck. I'll take my chances. Naruto nearly scoffed outright. They weren't going to die in the wave. None one would if he had anything to say about it. He'd make sure of that. Of course, Mirelia didn't know what he was truly capable of. No one in the kingdom. Everyone assumed he was just one man, and he was a man who could field an army of hundreds in an instant and be in countless places at once. If he worked with Mirelia, he could bolster those ranks with yet more soldiers from the kingdom, and Blastia felt so good against them. Mirelia could only poke and prod him so much. Like I said, the king tries to take our life, we take his wife. And really, what loyalty did he owe Alt Cray anyway? Screw that BSDRD. Be with me. Her full lips brushed his, words a naked whisper. Be mine. I promise you shan't regret it. Just like that, Naruto's hands betrayed him, settling against her hips to hold her fast. He could feel her curves, even through the loose tunic she wore. Mirelia hissed out a breath and shivered a little, then leaned the rest of the way to close the last bit of distance between them. He didn't stop her. He could have. He knew that. He chose not to. They didn't do anything overt. They just held one another at first. It felt nice, all things considered. Her lips against his, the fullness of her body pressed against him. His BLD sang in her embrace, warming to her presence, and he found himself returning the embrace with gusto. Judging by the pleased sound she made, he knew he'd succeeded. Her hands reached up, curling in his hair as she pushed against a nearby wall. With that, the last bastion of restraint crumbled in him. You certainly don't, Amelia gasped as he lifted her leg. Lack for vigor, do you? I still say we are not doing this, King CRP. He grumbled between kisses. Her or not, I can't possibly be a king. Naruto's brow gave a spasmodic twitch as the carriage trundled down the road. Don't sulk. Mirelia cooed, leaning against him. You'll get wrinkles. I still haven't agreed to anything, you know. She hid a smile behind her fan. He frowned. I'm serious. She nodded. Don't you mean, Missy? Today saw the two of them ranging further from the castle than before, though not with some unfortunate side effects. Naruto's gut groaned with each bump they hit. No doubt the guards outside were getting all manner of ill ideas. He didn't care. Carriages were evil. Whoever invented was a demon lord. Had to be. He tried to turn his thoughts elsewhere, to focus on the goal he had. Their destination, one Luralona village, was supposedly a tidy little seaside hamlet near the cliffs, filled with demi-humans. If word was to be believed, the lord and his daughter were facing troubles of his own, both through lack of manpower and other, darker issues. As in said issues being slavers lurking near the borders. It didn't help that his stomach was roiling in this stupid wooden box. This place has few defenses. The queen, bless her, tried to help and distract him further. If the wave hits here, they'll be wiped out. I'm sure they'll be glad of what soldiers we can spare. But it won't be enough, will it? She winced in silent sympathy. We'll know soon enough, I suppose. His nausea abated for a moment as he raised his gaze. No, I'll protect this place with my best. I won't allow any casualties. You're just one man, she favored him with a pitying look. You can't be everyone at once. His eyes sparked. About that he tried to continue, to offer some stinging comment, but his body finally failed him at the last. His face turned green. Oh gods, here it came. Blurg. Mirelia leaned back with a grimace, lifting her feet from the floor. I didn't think you were the sort to get carriage sick. Naruto groaned anew, choking it down. Neither did I. I've run way faster than this, so why? Mirelia didn't shy away from the mess he'd made any further. She simply patted his back. There, my hero bravery isn't having no fear, bravery is having fear. But you do it anyway. That's what a hero does, no matter the odds. No matter the danger. Stand your ground, hold the line, fight. Fellowship, peaceful. That was the best word to describe Luralona, Naruto found. He'd already known the demi-human village was a scenic little seaside hamlet near the cliffs from the get-go. Mirelia had told him as much on the carriage ride over Curse, that accursed box to the blackest pit, but seeing, as they say, was believing. And what a sight it was. Looking upon it now, he hadn't realized just how far out of the way this place. Well away from the worries of the world, the people within, and make no mistake, they were people to him, no matter what some of the fussy folk back in the capital might say, were good and honest folk. Somewhat startled by his and Mirelia's unannounced arrival perhaps, yet they nevertheless welcomed them with open arms. News of the coming wave curbed their initial enthusiasm somewhat, but the promise of protection, both his and the crown's alike, went a long way to easing tensions and elevating them in their eyes once more. Everyone wanted to see them after that, speak to them, touch them. Him in particular. So much touching. Hey, he laughed as someone yanked on his arm. Watch the armor, it's expensive. Another change from the capital, they were all just so damn nice. Someone slung a flower wreath over his head when he wasn't looking, then another came forth with one for the queen. Mirelia flashed him a coy smile as she accepted the gift. Still, there could be no denying the anxiety in her eyes. Not towards the people here, far from it, her anxiety was directed elsewhere. She stepped into him, her words masked by the noise around them. When the wave comes, this place may fall, agreed. This place has little in the way of defenses. He muttered aside as she shook a man's hand. If the wave hits here, they'll be wiped out. I won't allow it. And abandon the rest of the kingdom. I already told you, you're just one man. Mirelia murmured back. You can't be everywhere at once. His eyes sparked. About that well, seeing was believing. Even now, he could feel more than few frantic gazes on them. Watching. Waiting for words of encouragement. It gave him the perfect opportunity. Ahem. He coughed into his right fist, creating a pall of silence between them and the imploring eyes looking their way. I know some of you are scared. His eyes swept over each of them, taking everyone in turn, men, women, and children alike. You have every right to be. The waves are no joke. However, quick as a flash, he slashed his right arm up, pumping a fist toward the clouds. I'm here now, and I won't be the last hero to arrive. You've got my word on that. Mirelia stepped up beside him. Even now the other nations are working to summon the other heroes. Be assured, we are doing everything in our power to keep you from harm. He heard someone mutter something about the shield hero. Curious. Seemed he was a popular sort among the demi-humans. He'd have to ask Mirelia more about that one later when they were alone. Someone in the crowd took umbrage with his words. He never knew who. But you're just one man, how can you protect us alone? Mirelia favored him with a long, somewhat questing look. It was as much invitation as anything else. You're right. Naruto crossed his hands, fingers gone rigid. I am just one man. However, smoke bloomed forth. Wind swept it away. And they saw. We are many. He'd forever remember their faces and Mirelia's gasp as no less than 100 shadow clones appeared behind him, speaking in flawless unison. The fact they stood at attention in 4 separate regiments only made their arrival all the more impressive by his reckoning. Maybe it was petty of him to bask in that as much as the awe that followed. No, it definitely was, but he just couldn't help himself. He took a moment, folded both arms before his tea, and stared down into the crowd, daring anyone to object. He did so love being underestimated after all. Likewise, he was unable to keep the smile from his face. Any more questions? One could hear a cricket chirp in the silence that followed. Then, not even that. Kurama hummed in thinly veiled pleasure. Never get tired of it, great. Naruto clapped his hands together, producing a flinch from those assembled before him. Let's get started. From there, he began the unenviable task of delegating orders. Group 1 will raid the nearby forest for lumber and start building wooden palisades around the village. The lads saluted and marched off. Group 2, round up those fit enough to fit and run them through a few drills. Shields, spears, knives, doesn't matter. Just make sure they have weapons. A chorus of affirmatives, and then they too were away, slipping into the shadows of Luralona as the stunned demi-humans looked on in silent shell-shock. Group 3, bring me all the scrap metal and stone you can find. We'll use that for a few surprises. Their smiles said enough as they slipped away. Pranks were a lot like pitfalls in a sense. Use them right and they could be downright lethal. What about us, boss? Taking a deep breath to steady himself, the weary whiskered warrior turned to face the last group of 25. Group 4 will enter the forest alongside Group 1, but their focus will be securing food and supplies, in case this turns into a siege. He took a deep breath. After that, I want you to scout the perimeter. If you see any sign of these so-called slavers I've heard tell of lurking in these parts, he slammed a fist into an open palm, producing an audible pop. Smash. They hooped as one unit and raced after Group 1. You do realize we could have made a 5th group to test out our skills. Amber burbled happily atop his shoulder, gnawing against the pauldron there. Greedy little glutton. She'd probably grow yet some more before their day was through. Idly he reached up to scratch the top of her head. Maybe later. Right now, the best offense was a good defense. He could focus on leveling up later, assuming his clones could transfer more than memories here. If so, he'd just found a glorious way to grind. A hand tugged at his sleeve, snatching him out of his thoughts. And what of us, M-Lord? Naruto looked down and found a young girl with pale hair and green eyes, clutching a younger sibling in one arm. Idly he took in tan skin and white hair, then her black horns at a glance. She didn't look like the other demi-humans. In fact, she almost looked like some kind of devil or some such. Then her earlier words caught up to him, and his face flamed for an altogether different reason. Lord. Kurama's cackle didn't help. Lord? No, I really ain't tug. She was still looking to him imploringly, they all were, and his will faltered in the face of their need. Fine, fine. Gimme a second. A quick crossing of his fingers created yet another group of 25 clones. Not quite the even 100 he had first hoped for, but it would do. Stick with Group 5. They're in charge of protecting you if the wave hits here. All of you. He raised his voice against a few old curmudgeons that saw fit to grumble his way. Anyone got a problem with that? No one did. Thank you, Lord. The girl's smile hurt to see, if only because of the trust therein. Snuffing, he muttered, waving an arm at her. You're welcome, miss. She beamed up at him with her more admiration than he liked. Zest. There was something about that name. He'd think about it later. Right, Zest. Absently, he patted her head. Run along now. I will. Her smile didn't waver. I'll see my elder brother pays you back for this when he returns. His sixth sense twitched. Brother. She held the infant close to her breast, sketched a clumsy curtsy much to his embarrassment and raced away, leaving him with that worrying thought. Mercifully, everyone dispersed shortly thereafter. Only then did he dare turn to face Mirelia. So is that good? Marvelous. The queen stepped in with a warm smile, flung both arms round his neck and kissed his cheek heedless of the scene she made. You were an inspiration. Looking well past him in spite of the gasps that went up, the faintest smile creased her face. To me and them both. He shrugged to that effect. Still don't get why they were so leery of me at first. The people here are good and decent folk, she retorted sadly. Nevertheless, they're looked upon as lesser by some in this kingdom. It's made some cautious. What, for having extra ears and the odd tail here and there? He glanced their way, watching a man help a clone with a barrel of nails. Well, he tried to help, only for the clone to carry it single-handedly. Doesn't seem right. No, it does not. That said, she flicked a look over her shoulder suddenly, paying Amber little mind as she feasted on bits of his armor. 'Twould seem you have some young admirers. Naruto tried to look where she was, only for her to capture his face with 2 fingers first. Warm lips brushed the outer lobe of his ear, her breath a naked whisper. Find my tent tonight? Heat seared the back of his neck. You're terrible, you know that. The queen didn't answer with words. She simply turned and sashayed away, hips swaying. His gaze lingered. Mirelia did not walk. Walking was for peasants. She absolutely strutted. Had to be doing that on purpose, yup. She just run a hand across her flank and looked back. A wink and she was gone. Wicked witch of a woman, you could bounce a coin off. Kurama coughed. Nothing. Remembering her words, he craned his neck back to where she'd first indicated. As luck would have it, Mirelia been right. He was being watched. Still, he hadn't expected kids. He spied 2 of them, one a little lass with bright hair and lively red eyes, all but hanging over a rickety fence to get a better look at Heimer, perhaps his armor. Clad in a brown tunic and trousers though she was, they did nothing to diminish her demi-human features. He spied twitching ears atop her head and a swaying tail thrashing behind her little legs. A raccoon demi-human, if he remembered his names correctly. Their other had crept just a bit closer, a weasel demi-human by the look of her. Bit shorter than her friend, but no less bold for that. Compared to her friend, it was like night and day. Her eyes were the color of golden honey with furred ears to match, peeking out of boyish straw-colored hair. Said ears twitched warily his way when he didn't look away, as if she weren't sure whether to approach him or flee. Eventually the former won out and she vaulted the fence entirely to walk his way. Her companion shouted something, to which the blonde retorted, forcing her to hurry after her lest she be left behind. His keen senses caught the tail end of their argument as they approached. He's scary, Ravenna. Be fine, Raphtalia, he's a hero. Is it wrong that I want to spook them anyway? Be nice. Outwardly, he plastered a smile to his face and then very slowly lowered himself to the grass. Your friend's right. Ain't gonna bite, you know. Careful to keep bot palms visible at all times, he crossed both legs beneath him and leaned their way. Was there something you wanted? The 2 children exchanged an anxious glance. The one no, as Rifanna beamed back at her timid friend. Told you he's harmless, My sweet summer child, you have no idea. Before he could hope to get a word in edgewise, the little blonde began to pace around him. She circled him twice. Circled them again. Frowned now when she failed to find anything resembling weaponry. He even let her lift one of his arms, smirking a little when she struggled with it. On a whim he lifted the limb and let her dangle in the air from his bicep. His feet flailed furiously for a wild moment, then she surprised him. In truth, he half expected her to let go like any sensible child would. He wasn't prepared for her to latch on like a lemur, lever herself upright onto his limb and grin at him. Huh? Her companion yelped, hands flying to her face. Let go, don't climb on the hero. It's fine, Raphtalia. Should listen to our friend there, feisty. Naruto held his arm out fro himself, trying his damnedest not to laugh. But you're not going to let go, are you? Anna continued to smile without a care in the world. Nope. He quirked a brow at her. I could shake you off. You could, she allowed, but you won't. Alright, I'll bite, he said. Why not? Heroes don't hurt little girls. She had him there. Not so, Amber. His precious pet chose that precise moment to emerge from the hidden shoulder of his cloak. Golden eyes snapped to Anna. Narrowed now as she found someone upon her perch. She snapped her jaws once. Anna saw her, heard the noise, and pitched backwards off his arm with a yelp. Mercifully she landed HRD on her rear, nothing more than her pride wounded. For Amber, it may as well have been a glorious victory. The little monster leered down at her fallen foe from her perch on his shoulder, threw her spherical form upright, and cried her triumph to the heavens. Victory was hers. It was too much to hope that would dissuade Rafana's attention. Is that really a monster on your shoulder? She sprang upright, regarding him with starry eyes. I've never seen one before. Naruto didn't miss the way Raphtalia crowded in with her, hiding behind her more outspoken friend. There could be no escaping the curiosity of children. She's tame, well, mostly. He held out his free-hand arm and whistled once. Amber perked up, bounded off his shoulder, onto his elbow, then into his open palm. She lingered there, head upturned, watching him. He snagged a bit of bacon jerky from his pouch and offered it her way, waving it to and fro as one might a lure on a rod. Her eyes followed it. Watching. Waiting. Hitch. He let it fly and she lunged for it, surging up and out his palm to claim his prize. She landed just as quickly, content to chew, to savor her morsel. While she was distracted, his hand descended slowly, fingers settling upon her brow. From there he began to her scalp in slow, circular movements. A pleased purr escaped her as she ate, slouching in his grasp with a sated sigh. The girls cooed at the sight. Raphtalia edged forward first, surprising him. May I? Amber's eyes snapped toward her. Naruto blew out a sigh. Suppose that depends on her, the raccoon girl approached. Amber eyed her warily. No, she considered after a moment's pause, feeling the weight of MSDR's gaze. Not food. Emster would be cross if she tried to bite this one. Dar had granted her intelligence, meager though it was. Emser was her Emter, of course, just as the crowned one was MSDR's mate. Next to them, she may as well be a mote of dust. MSDR's presence put words in her head, gave her wisdom, a proper purpose, one she'd lacked in her earlier mindlessness, a light in the dark. Is it really all right? The child's voice was muffled, wary even. Can I really touch her? Amber glowered at the tiny furred creature. Mustn't bite. Besides, this was not the clingy creature, not the one who sought to usurp her place only a few moments ago. She approached with due diligence and proper fear. Yes, all shall fear her. She was strong, she was mighty, she waswaso. This creature gave good scratches. Two Emser made a pleased noise and she let herself relax, even allowing the clingy creature to touch her. Every day she grew stronger, by his grace. Wiser. The more she consumed, the more she grew. The more she grew, the more she learned. And the more she learned, the more she came to understand MSDR's will. She could think now, for a lack of her better term. If wished for the lesser fleshy creatures to praise her, all the better. Someday, when she was bigger, stronger, she'd be able to repay for this. And she would repay him. She's so soft, and squishy, too, that tiny ember of intelligence in Amber's primitive mind sparked anew. Yes, that's right. Though she lacked the means to speak, she preened all the same. Proffer praise upon me, mortals I am if right there that's the spot. Well, would ya look at that? Guess she likes ya? That was putting it mildly, Naruto thought. Amber was all but putty in their hands. Who would have thought she would be won over so easily? Not him. She'd gone downright docile in their grasp. Strong to believe, given she'd been ready to and willing to bite them only a few moments before. A soft ping echoed in the back of his head. Amber has acquired the charm skill. That voice again. Stranger still. Did it apply to her too? Curious. I'll keep an eye on her in any case. What kind of hero are you? Naruto blinked, realizing one of the girls had asked him something. I'm sorry, I said. Anna planted both fists on her hips and squinted at him. What kind of hero are you? Are you sure you're not the shield hero? Papa says the shield is the only nice one. Raphtalia chirped helpfully. The others are mean. A eyebrow quirked. Is that so? Sorry, no shield here. Just my fists. But that's silly. Anna wrinkled her nose at him. Everyone knows you can't be a hero without a weapon. Patently untrue Lee and Guy were heroes of the finest caliber in his eyes, and they relied on nothing but the strength of their own bodies. Tsunade was in a league of her own. Come to think of it, there were any number of shinobi who didn't rely on weapons for that matter, and they were heroes one and all to him. Really? He blinked instead, stifling a laugh. Then laughed. Who decided that? Of course you wait. And I'm sure you'll meet the real shield hero someday. He'll be amazing, I'm sure. A thought occurred to him just then, and on a whim he rolled with it. What did you say your names were? Raphtalia. The smaller of the two replied instantly. Anna, the bolder blonde chirped. All right, he reached a hand down for each of them and ruffled their hair. Be sure to grow big and strong, the both of you, okay? I'm sure he'll need all the help he can get. Raphtalia bobbed her head, but Anna dithered, staring studiously at her feet. So, you're friends with monsters, right? Amber hopped back onto his shoulder, drawing an errant look her way. More or less, I guess. In all honesty, he was curious to see how far his newfound abilities could take him. What could he tame? What couldn't he? What manner of enemies would he face? Would he continue to grow stronger in this world? Or had he reached a plateau? Truthfully, he had no way of knowing. The world was his oyster, the possibilities, its pearl. He just had to reach out and grasp it. Rifana's gaze rose to meet his eyes intent, and such thoughts fell to the wayside. Does that make you a beast hero? Suppose so, he sensed another question coming. Why? She paused, wrung her hands, and spoke again. Could you train us? His brow shot up and she squirmed under his gaze. I mean, you're probably going to be here a few days, and clever, very clever girl, this one. He opened his mouth to reply, we've got company. Always with the interruptions, it seemed. At Kurama's prodding, Naruto sensed the newcomers long before he heard them or saw them. Pivoting on one heel, he beheld a rising plume of dust in the distance just as his ears heard the steady stampede of hooves approaching their little gathering with all due haste. A column of mounted men, 10 strong no, 11 he amended idly, finally noticing the armored knight at their head. That well-armored rider rode at the front of them, sat astride a black destrier, making all due speed their way. Someone in that group blew a horn. He never knew who. Raphtalia gulped. He nudged her and Anna back to the village. Run along, you two. They didn't need to be told twice. They got. Another horn echoed not far away, answering it. More dust arose as other groups joined the first. Soon enough that once small squad numbered nearly 30. He looked around and found Mirelia stomping back his way, face right from stone. It was an expression he found himself emulating as the group peeled off the road and made for the village. For them. As one, the demi-humans drew back, seeking shelter behind the clones he'd made, just as intended. A knife slipped from Naruto's sleeve and smacked into his palm. Slavers. Hardly. Mirelia reached him and pushed his arm down. Frankly, I'd take those brutes compared to this lot. Much to their confusion, the armored warrior dismounted and removed their helm. As they looked on, said warrior held up a hand. Those behind her came to a halt. The figure approaching them was undoubtedly a woman. Long strawberry blonde hair flew free to frame a pale face from which blue eyes shone, keen orbs capable of piercing even the densest rock. Hers was a face that could rival even the finest of beauties if she didn't look so damnably stern right now. Still, there was something underneath that stoic demeanor that beckoned the eye. Made him want to get to know her, you know. There, her voice rang clearly, spanning the distance between them. Return the queen at once. Naruto tilted his head. Knight, say what now? Return me, you say? Mirelia stepped out behind him with put-upon sigh. What is the meaning of this? Her eyes widened, but only for the merest of moments. My lady. Step away from him at once, she lifted her chin. I will do no such thing. I have come here of my own volition. The knight paused. We were told you had been kidnapped. Naruto's jaw closed with an audible CLCK. Is that so? Mirelia's expression could have frozen rainwater. The bite in her voice actually sent tendrils of frost creeping across the grass. And who, pray tell, told you such a thing? My daughter. Or perhaps a foolish old man confined to his bed. The Lady Knight looked away with a grimace, a hint of pink burning across her face. It was the former, your grace. Lady Malty was most insistent. Mirelia pinched the bridge of her nose. Malty, that foolish girl, whatever will I do with her? Spank her. Sounds like she deserves a spanking if she's making trouble. Kurama, what? At least I'm honest about it, Neil. Mirelia's command cut through the fog of his mind like a dagger in the dark, though it wasn't neither meant for nor directed at him. The anger in her voice startled him all the same. Eclair complied almost immediately, as did the legion behind her. Even those mounted men lowered their heads in quiet reverence. Forgive me, the Lady Knight all but prostrated herself before the seething monarch. I didn't think, no, you did not. You will send no less than 3 riders back to the capital to inform your father of this miscommunication. She all but loomed over the pink-haired woman now, casting her prone figure in shadow. Any word from Malty's mouth is no longer to be trusted. Do you understand? The knightess nodded rapidly, eager to appease her. But now that you and yours are here, you shall be put to work. The knight dared to raise her head. Of course. I live to serve. That's right. You do. You would do well to remember such. Naruto coughed into a fist. And this is Claire. Mirelia elucidated for his benefit. Lord Sieto's daughter. Someone I left in the capital to oversee things while I was away. She touched a hand to the girl's chin, bidding her to rise. Though it seems he failed to notice my daughter's scheme in time. Perhaps this will be more pleasant than I thought. Amber chose that moment to make herself known by gnawing on his shoulder. Eclair's gaze snapped to her. What manner of creature is that with you? A monster? Hey, Naruto silked his tongue. I'll have you know she's a growing girl, so be nice, will ya? She is harmless, then. Whoa. Careful, she likes to. His warning fell on deaf ears, for Eclair showed no fear. Rather than retreat like any sane individual, she stepped in, sheathed her sword, and raised a hand. Amber perked up, raising her chin in anticipation. Gloved fingers rubbed the underside of what passed for her belly. The little creature trilled happily and all but leaned into her hand. He carved Eclair's expression into his mind's eye because for a moment there, she looked like a normal girl, not the stern, gullible knight most saw her as. A single word slipped past her lips. Cute. Amber hummed in agreement. Unique skill, charm, has reached level 2 for Amber. Naruto resisted the urge to sigh as the voice retreated from whence it came. One of these days he'd figure out who that was and have long chat with them. But if that was one of the only skills Amber had, then surely it was harmless. What was the worst she could do with it? Even if she managed to make someone lower their guard, she could only bite them, and that skill certainly didn't work on him, so nothing to worry about, right? Mirelia tapped her foot, claiming his attention. If you're quite done. Amber all but rocketed out of Eclair's hands and perched upon his head. Slowly, warily, the knightess considered him anew. You are the hero, Not by choice, Naruto scratched the back of his head, but yeah, that'd be me. Eclair looked him up and down, then up once more for good measure. Frowned. You're truly the hero. For the love Ophies, she hung her head and bowed low. Then I kindly ask that you punish me for my transgression. Mirelia made an amused noise behind her fan. Naruto nearly choked on his own spit. She was just so damned earnest. He couldn't bring himself to deny her request. But still, punish her. He wasn't that kind of guy. Allow me to offer a solution. Mirelia stepped between them, drawing a flinch from the knight and a frown from Naruto himself. The people here are anxious. Nervous. She swept a hand back to where the villagers stood only a stone's throw away, watching fretfully. Why not give them a show to set their spirits at ease? Eclair blanched. Against a hero. I could never, sure great, Naruto jumped at it as a starving man would a steak. Anything to avoid whatever punishment this girl was after. What did you have in mind? Her sinister smile was almost enough to make him reconsider. He felt a muscle jump in his jaw. What was she up to? But now Mirelia was turning to face Eclair, the poor girl. What say you to a duel? A murmur of excitement rose up from the watchful villagers. By contrast, the proud knight whimpered. Why me? At the end of the day, you only have one life. It's your choice what to make of it. Will you run? Or will you fight? That's your answer. Surprising. Tame the beast. Are you certain about this? Naruto stepped into the ring, scratched the back of his head, and regarded Eclair with a rueful sigh. Certain. He wasn't certain about much of anything these days. Honestly, the idea of a duel didn't much tickle his fancy to begin with. Had they been alone, he would have vetoed it outright. But they weren't alone now, were they? Everyone from Raphtalia's village had gathered to observe them. Men, women, children, all. Some had gone so far as to set up chairs, others were taking bets, and still more were actually selling food to Eclair's soldiers. Enterprising little buggers, these demi-humans. And he was fine with that, really. What bothered him was the expectant look in Mirelia's eyes. Clearly she didn't just want him to win, she expected to seem do so with style. Right, totally his thing. Using her magic, the queen drawn a witty shallow ring of ice around them in the dirt, giving both parties plenty of room to pace about at their leisure. Most of the village had gathered at least a few steps back from it, the better to avoid being caught in any crossfire coming from said ring. Naturally, leaving its confines would equate to a loss. Good thing he didn't plan to lose. The duel shall be to first forfeit or ring out. Her piercing eyes swept between them, and was it his imagination, or did Eclair stand just a little straighter under her gaze? No loss of life or limb will be tolerated. Are these terms acceptable? Eclair flushed, having been caught staring. I mean, they are, my lady. Naruto shrugged. Works for me. Are you ready? He rolled one shoulder in a shrug. Eclair touched a hand to her scabbard and nodded. Mirelia hummed. Very well. Take your positions now. 3 steps back. The things I let her do to me. Naruto blew out a sigh and craned his neck toward the sidelines. Even from this angle, he could see little Raphtalia and Rifana on the sidelines, watching with oh so wide eyes. Like they thought the world of him, you know. He still didn't understand that. He wasn't all that special. Really, he wasn't. Spectacular feats like his were pretty commonplace. Heed though he had imparted as much upon the little tykes. Now if only they'd stop cheering for him. Damn it, go Naruto. Fight, fight, fight. Aw, you have fans. A few chuckles arose from the crowd. The back of his neck seared red and he palmed his face. Exhaled heavily now. Fine. Just this once, he'd Raphtalia and Rifana show. And speaking of shows, he'd seen one, an old one, a ways back in his world. It gave him an idea. Time to hop off, Amber. He rolled his shoulder to make his intentions clear. Come on. This is my fight, not yours. When the little monster favored him with a baleful glare, he almost laughed. No, you can't bite her. She didn't budge, and he sighed. I'll find you some of those carrots you like after this, promise? Her eyes sparkled. Thata girl. Go play with Raphtalia and Rifana. She made a questioning noise and he understood the intent behind it. Yeah, fine, you can be a little rough. Now shoo. Amber all but launched herself off his shoulder and bounded their way with a proud squeak. Judging by her toothy grin, there might be more than bit of biting. But wasn't like she could harm anyone in her current state. Surely the girls wouldn't have any trouble with her. The queen's hand swept down with a flourish and his attention snapped back. Begin. Very well. Eclair's sword slid free from its sheath with a wordless hiss. I will attempt to strike you, beast hero. Please defend yourself in a manner befitting a warrior such as yourself. Kurama grinned in the back of his head. Poor choice of words. Rather than strike first, Naruto stood his ground and allowed Eclair circle him. He could have ended things right then and there. Instead he chose to wait, letting her range about the ring, looping about him in tighter and tighter circles. Closer now. Any second. Watching, waiting any moment now, there the Lady Knight blurred in at him with a mighty cry, striking with both power and poise. Her sword hurtled in at his head and he didn't move. Eclair saw his smile and continued through, bringing her blade down in a devastating arc that stopped just shy of his forehead. A stray strand of blonde hair fluttered to the ground in its wake. Any closer and she might have taken his nose. He tilted his head just, smiling a little as her weapon came to rest in the soil at their feet. Her brow furrowed. Are you mad? Why didn't you try to avoid that? I knew you would stop. He beamed back. You didn't have any killing intent behind it. She really didn't look half bad when she blushed like that. Yes, well, Eclair looked away with a sputter, her face gone a pretty shade of pink. This time I'm not going to stop. Whatever you say. He let her retreat, waving his right hand to goad her on. Do your worst. He could practically hear her teeth grinding from here. Defend yourself this time. Naruto raised a fist and uncurled a single finger from it. His pointer finger rose, and after a moment, glowed gold with chakra. Eclair saw it, frowned, but offered no objection as it continued to spark and sizzle. He granted her a small smile in return. Was he showing off? Undoubtedly. Did it feel good? Almost certainly. His point made, he planted both feet, stretched his arm out, then crooked that lone digit at her in a come-hither motion. An odd murmur went up from the crowd, but he paid them little mind. Claire edged forward, made wary by his smile. As she should be. Surely you don't intend to stop me with one finger. He nodded once, little more than a bob of his head. It set her right off. She ked her blade it with a snarl. Blue eyes blazed gold. Clang he parried with his glowing finger. Stopped her cold. Sparks flew as she strained against him, eyes bulging in disbelief. From there he twisted his wrist, diverting the force of her strike downward. Her blade went wide and struck the dirt, carving a deep furrow therein. The sheer momentum of her own strike sent her stumbling past him. He reached around and gave her a soft poke between the shoulders for good measure. She squeaked in surprise, pivoted, brought her blade to bear again. He took up his stance once more. Was that enough? Her eyes snapped to his, half-lidded with anger. Do you mock me, good sir? Not at all. He didn't waver in his stance. You said it yourself, this is a duel, not a fight to the death. Why would I take this seriously? Yes, Eclair struck at him in a devastating sweep. A strike he stopped again with a single rigid digit. I am a knight, good sir. I will not have you make light of me. Another furious blow, another riposte that left her on the back foot. Stop that, she cried. Stop defending and attack me. I can, but it's no fun if I try. Laughter swung up fro the crowd. Claire made angry Eclair noises. Naruto let her stomp and seethe, giving her more than time to cool her head before she came at him again. Some said the stick was plenty good, found the carrot better. And besides, he was kinda curious. Was everyone in this world skilled like Mirelia? Or was she the exception to the rule? The outlier? He wanted to know. Damn it all, he needed to know. Tell you what, he moved his finger at the angry knight, bringing her up short. If you manage to make me use anything other than this, I'll make it worth your while. Her eyes narrowed. And what, pray tell, might this of yours be? The hook baited. Now to see if she took the bait and pulled out any hidden tricks she might have. Well, you'll never if you keep standing there. He whistled and beckoned anew. Come on, the sun's going down. Claire exhaled softly and closed her eyes. They snapped open again a moment later, blue eyes burning with inner light. His own widened in momentary surprise. Well, color him interested. Then she was upon him, her body a graceful whirl of steel, a dance of blades seemingly assaulting him from all sides, a flowering flurry of flourishes that rent the very air between them. She was fast all right, almost frightfully so, even with all of that armor. Anyone else would have been sorely pressed to defend themselves. Naruto stopped them all. Time and time again his finger interjected, thrusting itself between him and certain death. Faster! Fastest! Children cooed in awe as she wailed on him, and he in turn deflected each of her attacks. Adults applauded the display, doubtlessly thinking it part and parcel of the show. Even when stepped in, curled one finger inward, and FLK'd her forehead. Claire recoiled, shook her head and glowered at him. Naruto stuck out his tongue. Nye, she rushed back in. He closed his eyes as that lone digit interposed itself between her blade once more. She's not bad, for a rookie. Meh. Kurama scoffed. In terms of physical strength, I'd rate her a midgenin at best. And that's being generous. So cruel, why can't I hit you? Oh dear, someone sounded angry. Had his eyes been closed that long? Naruto opened them and found Eclair slumped over her sword before him, stamina spent, weapon driven point first into the ground. Wasted and gasping for air, she glared bloody blue daggers at him. Sweat beaded the length of her brow and several other places. Oh dear. He could see right through her soaked jacket. Probably best not to mention that. Instead, he settled for a compromise. Because you're green. Eclair flinched as if he'd struck her across the face. What? An amateur. He meant the words to be frank, but judging by the way she'd winced he'd struck a nerve and she'd taken insult. It's not your fault, not really. I've been in more battles than you've seen sunsets. Heck, at your age I'd already fought elite ninja, several demons, and saved the world 10 times over. A wry grin touched the corner of his mouth as he remembered something else. Also made a goddess blush. Mirelia snorted behind them. Indeed, that sounds like something you would do. Claire's brow furrowed. You made that last one up, my sweet summer child, you have no idea, nope. Naruto smacked his lips, producing an audible pop. What I'm saying here is, really, it's just a matter of experience. I have more than you now, but you'll catch up someday. Sure, it'll be tough, and you might have to fight dirty along the way, but so long as you stick with it, you'll do just fine. Eclair pursed her lips. She really was adorable when she pouted. A knight should fight with honor. Honor gets you killed, sweetheart. Kurama spoke and he let him, eager to knock some sense into what just might be a promising fighter. Take it from someone who knows. Is that so? She tore her blade free from the dirt and straightened with a pained grimace, wiping a hand against her dripping brow once more. In that case, I'll take those words to heart. Naruto knew what was coming next. Quick study, this one. Sure enough, she FLK'd her hand at him, whipping bead of sweat his way. Her glove followed, flung free to smack him in the face. He closed his eyes against it even as he feigned surprise. An admirable trick, but Kakashi had been trickier still. Blinding your opponent was Shinobi 101, after all. She's willing to play dirty, I like her. The moment he closed his eyes, Eclair cut out at his legs. He sensed her intent. She wasn't going to cut him, but give him a stern smack on the thigh to assuage her wounded pride. He still could have blocked, if not with his hands, then a knee. In a moment of mercy he deigned to hop over it instead. Her bright eyes flashed hot with triumph as he shot upwards, so much so that he couldn't help but laugh. It was such a tiny, insignificant thing to be proud of, yet Eclair looked like he'd given her the world on a silver platter. I have you now. Cold steel speared up at his face while he was still airborne. Sound tactic, really. It was next to impossible to dodge in the air. Unfortunately for her, he had no longing to. He turned his head a fraction of an inch to one side, let the blade come and caught it between his teeth. Gravity did the rest for him. He crashed down into Eclair, all but smashing her into the ground. She went down with a most unladylike squeak. The crowd went wild. All but sitting on her stomach now, and with both hands planted firmly on her shoulders, he grinned down at her. She blinked back up at him, terribly startled. Ayadan. He slurred through a mouthful of steel. 'Cause the eyes tastes awful. Her face drained of all color then brightened. Not yet. I can still. A twist of his neck tore the saber from her grasp and sent it flying out the ring. When she struggled to rise, he took one hand from her shoulder and jammed a rigid finger under her chin, forcing her to look him dead in the eye. The tiniest gasp escaped her as he dug his fingernail into her windpipe. Just for a moment, but long enough to make his intent clear. Eclair froze beneath him. The world went silent, but for her own heavy breathing. At last, she averted her eyes. "I yield, my lord." Everyone went wild. Raphtalia and Rifana applauded loudest of all. Requirements met. And once more, that insufferable voice came back, chiming merrily in his mind. "Knight, declare." Naruto's jaw sealed open. Kurama howled with laughter. Naruto didn't. "Oh, come on, I know I beat her handily, but this is ridiculous. Since when can I tame people? She ain't even a monster. From a certain point of view, humans were once beasts." He scowled, blinked the message away, and climbed off the poor knight. If he could tame people by besting them in a duel, no, he didn't want to think of that. Eclair didn't seem any different than before. If anything, she looked rather cross at her dismal showing. As he looked on, she thumped a fist against the ground. One, twice, thrice now as she glared at the slowly sinking sun burning across the sky. At length she sat up with a huff. He watched her for a long moment, considering her as one might a skittish foal. Wasn't she going to say anything? At length she stood only to immediately drop to a knee before him. Her head bowed and her fist struck the ground one last time. Was she? She couldn't be. She could and she did. "I beg of you, take me into your party." Naruto's brow shot into his hair. "Come again." Eclair raised her gaze and gave him an arch look. "Is there a problem? Do you find me lacking?" No, he waved a hand. "You're plenty strong, but I mean you're a knight. Why throw that away to go adventuring? Your strength is extraordinary." A hint of pink dusted her pale cheeks. "I want that. No, I need that. Please teach me your ways. I wish to improve." Naruto felt his face begin to burn. He couldn't recall the last time someone had asked to learn anything from him, in quite a while. Behind them, Mirelia touched a hand to her cheek and hummed softly. "Very well. I'll allow it. You've done well, Eclair." "I have." Eclair sputtered incoherently. "To mean yes, of course. I live to serve, my lady." Perhaps, had Naruto seen the sly smile Mirelia now wore, he might have been concerned. Alas, he didn't, and so he reached a hand down for Eclair. She met him halfway, clasping her palm against his. He felt something pass between their linked fingers then, a spark of some sort. Whatever it was, she must have felt it too, because she jolted with a little yelp. She smothered it against a fist and beamed up at him beatifically, still on bent knee. "You'll not regret this, my lord." The blasted voice needled him again. "Knight Eclair has joined your party. Welcome aboard." Mirelia's tent wasn't strong to find. Framed in the light of the setting sun, it stood tall against the coming night, a bulwark before a fiery swathe of light cutting across the horizon, a burning blade in the dying dark. Almost gave him hope, it did. Her knights had set up something of a perimeter of sorts, both to keep well-wishers at bay as much as any who might wish her harm. Unlikely given all they'd done for Luralona, but he supposed it was better to be safe than sorry, lest someone try to strike at her. As if anyone could. Mirelia was quick with her spells and powerful to boot. A fitting match. Emboldened by those words, he threaded his way through. The guards saw him at once and let him pass with knowing smiles. One even clapped him on the shoulder and wished him well. Blast it. Did everyone know about this? Was she even trying to keep it a secret? Grumbling to himself, he parted the flap to her tent. She was waiting for him. Limned in the candlelight, she lay upon her cot, basking in the silence as she read from a book. His eyes narrowed. Strange. That bed looked oddly lumpy. Probably nothing to concern himself with. He drank her in. For once she'd shed her crown, leaving her hair to tumble free down her back. Of her armor there was no sign. She'd cast it aside in favor of a black gossamer silk gown as thin as it was fleeting. It clung to her figure yet kept it concealed all the same, hinting at the curves beneath without giving anything away. He saw her. She saw him. Naruto's throat went dry and he froze, feet all but rooting themselves to the floor. Here lay a foe far more dangerous than anything he'd ever faced. Give him Madara or Kagaya any day. At least he could face those two, fight them head-on without fear in his heart. But this. It wasn't a matter of mettle or battle, but a test of his very will. He wasn't even afraid of Mirelia. On the contrary, he'd rather begun to enjoy her presence. She'd teased out a side of him he hadn't even known existed. Her staid confidence in the face of any conflict and bemused smile were something he'd grown used to, not the constant temptation she represented. Simply put, Naruto didn't know how to respond to that. "There you are." She smiled at him, fire casting dancing shadows across her face. "Won't you come in?" His mind ran a gamut of emotions, his thoughts, a riot. Amber had no such conflict. She hopped off his shoulder, bounded over to the nearest corner and made tidy little nest for herself amongst the baggage there. In a matter of moments she'd fallen fast asleep. Naruto almost envied her simplicity. Pa would that it were so simple for him. Mirelia must have sensed some semblance of hesitation because that soft smile became a wicked smirk. "Dear hero of mine." One hand rose, idly tugging at the leftmost strap of her gown. Her bosom shifted against it, drawing his eyes. "I'm hardly going to stab you. Ain't the stabbin' I'm worried about." Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. One hand flew to her mouth to stifle a smile. "Well, you certainly don't mince words." "No," he looked away with a grumble, "I just put my foot in my mouth." Repeatedly. Mirelia tried and failed to stifle a snort. It burst out of her all at once, a short sharp bark of amusement that had no business with a lady's mouth, a noise for his ears and his ears alone. I almost forgot. It wasn't the queen he'd fallen in love with. Not the woman who put on airs in public and paid the part of distant dignitary for all the lords and ladies of court. He'd fallen for Mirelia. That wild wolf of a woman who all but begged for his help, who let her hair down in his presence, who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to chase it. Take it. Pin it down. And he shook his head, dispelling pleasant thoughts. Maybe Kurama was right. Screw the king. What did he owe that bstrd? Might be love, might be lust, but here in this instant, he just couldn't bring himself to care anymore. That thought finally freed his legs. He stalked to her side. Didn't miss the way her eyes followed him either, gauging his every step. He sat beside her. She laid her head against his shoulder and more of her body besides. This close there could be no escaping the scent of her. It quickened his pulse and burned in his beat. Damn it, she was so soft, I thought you might flee. Her words were a whisper in the low light. I wouldn't have blamed you. Her hand found his, fingers threading through his own. Strange how such a simple gesture could be so NTMT. I know I've been terribly forward. Understatement of the century. There. Heroes don't run, you know. She nuzzled his shoulder for a moment, comported herself, then looked up at him through long lashes. I won't force you to do anything you want. As if she could. I simply wish to be with you tonight. Her lips pecked his neck, planting a line of fire across his throat. He found himself inhaling sharply despite himself. That girl Eclair. What did you think of her? An odd question out of the blue. She's all right. He rolled one shoulder and looped a lazy arm around her waist. Might be able to train her up a bit now that I've apparently gone and tamed her. Mirelia blinked. Tamed. He palmed his face and cursed himself for the slip. It's a skill thing. Happened without my say so. Fascinating. I agree. Mirelia's smile widened for reasons he couldn't understand. You should take her under your wing. She kissed his neck again, drawing a gasp from him. Eclair is a very capable girl. Loyal, dutiful, never one to stray. You couldn't ask for a more loyal follower. Wait, you don't have a problem with me taming people? Ain't that something to worry about? She took him by the chin. Was it something you intended to do? He scowled at her in return. Are you going to abuse it? Of course not. There you have it. She let his face go with a pleased hum. It's merely another tool in your arsenal. In fact, I think it works out quite nicely. Naruto felt his brow furrow further at that. What was she getting at here? Kurama made an amused noise. I have an inkling. Care to share? Nope. Gonna let you suffer for a bit. This world is yours for the taking. I must confess, Mirelia's fingers fisted in his jacket, playing with the buttons there. I'm curious to see what you do with it. Wait. She stilled. Have I offended you in some way? No, it's not that. His hands closed around hers. It's just. She blinked up at him, batting long lashes. Bloody succubus diamen him for being sentimental. I want this to be special, you know. He fumbled for the words, then found them. I want it to mean something. I want to give you flowers, take you out places, and there will be time aplenty for that. She cut him off with a squeeze of her fingers. But tonight this means everything to me. Here, let me help you relax. She sat down in his lap, legs resting fully on either side of him. Reflexively he moved to hold her by the hips, something that only served to excite the queen further, judging by the pleased cry she made. Her rear ground against him and his world went white. He kept control, but only just until Mirelia whirled and pushed him down. Dark hair spilled across his face, blinding him to the world at large. Vibrant violet eyes met his. Their noses brushed. A coy smile tugged at her lips as she leaned in and claimed his lips for herself. When she kissed him, he returned the favor. Her lips were fire on his, burning in his BLD as her hands roamed across his. She tugged and teased his jacket off, even as he reciprocated, delighting in the feel of her, but he wasn't content letting her ride him. So he shoved her. Mirelia fell back with a scream turned law as she landed on the cushions of her bed. He followed, pinning her down. His fingers found the straps of her gown and slipped the white shift off her shoulders, exposing her full bosom to his wanting. Her eyes flashed and quite suddenly he found her atop him again. In the same instant she grinned, reached down. No, past him now, I have a surprise for you, beloved. Mirelia whispered, lips brushing the outer lobe of his ear. I do hope you like it. I had to be very persuasive. Naruto didn't have a chance to ask what because Mirelia reached past him, grabbed a fistful of heavy sheets and yanked. The blankets flew up with a flourish, landing on the other side of the bed. Someone squeaked out in surprise, a soft nose he'd heard once before. Naruto blinked. Wide blue eyes blinked back at him, only inches from his own, growing wider with each passing moment. He had thought the bed was oddly lumpy on one side. He hadn't been wrong. Now his mind fizzled, struggling for thoughts that wouldn't come. White lace, his brain supplied helpfully. Not helpful at all, Claire. She creaked an eye open, wearing a sheepish smile. Oh my lord. Mirelia gave her a nudge before she could falter. Don't blush. You asked for this, dear girl. And I am a most magnanimous queen. Are you not grateful? Claire buried her head in her hands with an embarrassed whimper. Naruto tried to speak. Tried to say something, console her, apologize for Mirelia's behavior. He really truly did. Unfortunately his mind was preoccupied at the moment. All that emerged was a string of gibberish. Kurama's laughter didn't help in gods. Claire looked so dim and red right now. Now then, Mirelia nestled against his back. Where we? Yes. I remember, much to Naruto's dismay, a faintly trembling Eclair took his front. As one, the unlikely duo pulled him into their arms. The night descended into carnal pleasure. As expected of a beast hero, you're mocking me, aren't you? No, not at all. Frankly, I'm amazed. My answer. Morning came with blazing surety. Rays of dappled sunlight began to brighten the queen's tent gradually at first, but with increasingly regularity. Night was done, the dawn had come, and it would not be denied. Time to rise and shine. Slowly but surely the rest of their camp gradually began to stir, and Luralona village alongside it. Shadow clones still worked around the clock to prepare the latter, a sleepless force that knew neither rest nor reprieve. Naruto did his best to ignore the ruckus his boys made, among other things. You have acquired new skills. H. He groaned. Quiet, sleepy. You have acquired new skills. One more word and I will end you. Understood. I will inform you later. Indeed, when those first warm rays fell over his face, when that pesky voice began to prod him, he made a valiant attempt to ignore both and stay asleep. First he tried turning his head away, scrunching his eyes shut. That at least stopped the voice. Not so the light. When it only grew brighter, he growled and rolled over, content to bury his head in a pillow. Failed now as he realized someone was holding onto his waist. His CST was likewise trapped. His arms and neck weren't, however, and he craned it to see what held him. Rather. Blue eyes bulged. Oh, that actually happened. Mirelia lay nestled against him, and he could feel Eclair behind him, arms wrapped tight around his They were utterly naked. Just like him. Anyone could have put two and two together. A lifetime ago Naruto might have shouted. Flailed like a fool. A small smile tugged at his lips. In a matter of moments it became a dopey grin. He sank back down, content to warm himself between their three warm forms and slip back into peaceful slumber. Wait a minute. 3. Kurama stirred. That can't be right. The blanket lifted beneath his legs and quite suddenly, Naruto found himself face-to-face with a girl. A bleary yawn greeted him as she crawled out onto his Mornin'. Her eyes caught his first, a striking shade of blue mixed with violet, pupils slitted akin to those of a wild cat. Likewise her skin was pale, almost ghostly so. Her long hair cascading down her back looked like someone had taken yellow and purple, thrown a bit of pale pink in, tried to mix them together, then given up halfway. The result was a strange rippling color that seemed to shimmer in the low light. A single pink strand dangled across her face amidst the gold and violet, furthering his confusion. She was just a kid. No, more than that, she kinda looked like a mini Mirelia crossed with a bit of Eclair. Even had whiskered cheeks. Naruto's throat closed up. No way, right? The sole mercy in this was that she was, thankfully, clothed, although it seemed she'd gotten into a fight with a burlap sack and lost. Hell, she was wearing the DMN thing like a giant shirt, tiny holes poked out for her head and limbs. He'd never seen her, and yet somehow it felt as if he knew this small child. She grinned at him, flashing fangs. I'm hungry. We don't have any more potatoes. He'd never heard her speak. Not once. But the way she did it had to be Amber. She grinned down at him, perched on his Hello, thank the sage for small mercies. For a wild moment there, he thought they had a kid. Impossible, of course, but his mind had leaped to conclusions. Unfortunately, it brought forth another conclusions. How on earth had that adorable little monster become this? He peeked at her status. And how was her level 9? Don't you hello me, he hissed under his breath. You're human how? She shook her head, setting her hair swaying. No, I'm not. He scowled at the sassy girl. Yes, you are. Another shake. No, I'm not. For the love of... His body might be trapped, but his hands weren't. He placed them together, a quick substitution jutsu, swapping himself with a pillow, hauled on his pants, swept the grinning girl into his arms, and clambered to his feet. She made a pleased nose and let him carry her to the corner of the tent without protest. The moment he reached it, he saw the broken barrels and torn sacks, bits of food crammed into a corner. Understanding dawned. He knew she liked to gnaw on everything. She must have founded and raided the queen's larder. It would explain her level if nothing else. But why on earth was she human? No matter what she might say, she was clearly. Amber tugged at his sleeve. Watch, don't be afraid. Watch what? He jolted in surprise as she dissolved into scarlet goo and fell out his arms to hit the floor with a dull splat. Amber. He balked at it, at her now in mute horror then genuine confusion as she swept over the remaining detritus. They sank into the liquid, never to be seen again. Not a single scrap remained. The goop solidified, forming an almost cherry-red semi-spherical shape, just like Amber's namesake. She sprang back up, assuming humanoid form once more, arms flung out at her sides. I'm a slime, now, Naruto choked down a relieved sigh. I can see that. Now that the disguise was broken, he really could. She looked human, like a mad blend of him, Mirelia and Eclair, but were one to look closely, they could see the imperfections. He could see through her in some places before she managed to mstr her human shape once more. It still didn't explain how she looked like this. Guess she evolved or something. Clearly, what in the world did you do last night? Willow, the former monster, touched a finger to her chin, then grinned up at him with all the innocence of a child. You guys were being really noisy last night, so I left the tent. I was hungry. His eyes bulged. Oh dear. Realization dawned. I went into some tents and I found a lot of yummy food. She clapped her hands, elked her lips, then made a face. Some icky tasting stones too. They tasted weird, but they made me really hungry. Still she barreled on in the face of his disbelief. I got lonely so I came back here. I went to sleep in one of the sacks, but then I woke up and I felt really cold for some reason. His right eye began to twitch. So you crawled into bed with me. That still doesn't tell me why you look like... Dunno, she granted him a guileless grin. I woke up like this, of course you did. Naruto palmed his face to stifle a groan. Mysteries for later, I guess. Look, you can't just go around eating everything. I think it might be raising your level. Where? Noise behind them, cutting through his words. Naruto pivoted and found Eclair rising with a yawn, still clutching the pillow he'd left behind as a substitute. She held it to her sissy with one hand, the other scrubbing at her eyes, blinking blearily now as she took in her dim surroundings. She saw them. Squeaked, face going red. Her eyes widened, blue eyes flitting left and right in hindsight. He wasn't sure if Mirelia had goaded Eclair into this, or just bullied her into it, but the fact remained that she'd done it. She remembered too, he saw the look in her eyes. Her gaze flitted down to herself in an instant, taking in her naked form, no doubt realizing what she'd done. Memories rushed back. Her body in his lap as Mirelia held her slim arms locked around his neck, hips bucking as she cried his name, heat speared through the back of his neck. Amber waved. Hello. Eclair buried her face in her pillow. Naruto tilted his head. Amber mirrored the motion. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Eclair burst to her feet, wrapping the sheets around herself like a lifeline. She did not move. She absolutely blurred. I have to go see a turby, and she ran. Naruto blew out a sigh as he watched her flee out the tent. Great. Now I'll have to track her down. What's all the ruckus? Amber dove behind a battered barrel. Just as well she did too, because Mirelia sat up and stretched with a languid yawn. By contrast, she didn't panic at all. When she saw him, her eyes widened, narrowed, softened. She laid down atop the remaining blankets and stretched again, taking her time. He watched her breasts heave. His mouth went dry. Sleep well, did you? Her eyes rose to meet his. My, raring to go again already. I suppose there's something to be had for a hero's stamina. His face burned all 7 shades of scarlet. Can you not right now? It's too early in the morning for this. My apologies. You're simply too fun to tease. Mirelia craned her neck, noting the absence of a certain night. Did little Eclair run off? No, don't answer that. Seems she did. Silly girl. Seems it'll take more than that to draw her out her shell. I'll have to try harder next time. A harsh clamor behind them drew her attention. Amber tumbled out a barrel and applied fixed firmly in her mouth. She grinned around it, slurring her words. Fon mer fu mazer, well, Celia cooed. Who is this little one? The slime girl perked up. Naruto swatted her head lightly. Don't talk with your mouth full. Hungry little thing, isn't she? It's quite all right. The queen tittered. I don't mind, wait. Her eyes narrowed and he glimpsed the keen intellect within. Is that Amber? The evolved girl finally finished her treat and dared a merry wave. Hiya, boss lady. Naruto tweaked her arm. Oi, still, how did she gain a humanoid form? She was certainly larger before this, but to undergo such a drastic change, Amber wilted. Did I do something bad? No, I just think you shouldn't advertise your abilities so openly. Maybe disguise yourself. A hooded figure poked their head inside before she could finish their theory. To his credit, the newcomer didn't panic. They saw them. My lady, the people are ready. Excellent. Mirelia lifted herself. I trust you, and the shadows made all the necessary preparations. A curt nod. We did indeed. But you may leave. Naruto frowned, feeling his head spin. Am I missing something here? Not at all. Mirelia's smile was impish when she turned to face him. Shall we address the people? What was she up to now? He grimaced. Do we have to? Indeed we do. Expect most of the camp is aware of us now in short order. She drew him outside. Naruto wasn't surprised to see so many eager faces awaiting them. He was, however, decidedly less pleased that they were all waiting for him. How long had they been standing here? Mirelia ushered him onto a wide, raised wooden platform, a sturdy thing that looked to have been made overnight. Unsurprising. His clones were still laboring to build walls around the village, though they'd let the villagers off early from morning drills for this. Something like this wouldn't have taken them more than an hour to make. Amber bounced once on his shoulder. "We're so high up, shoo." He shushed her, unable to completely keep the smile fro his face. He sensed a speech coming when Mirelia ushered him out onto the platform and stood beside him. He wasn't wrong. "You are the sole hero this kingdom, no, this world has to defend it." Her voice rose, pitched well to carry. "In time others will yet stand beside you, but for now it falls to you. Will you take up this burden, this mantle?" A bead of cold sweat ran down Naruto's brow, and not for the reasons one might think. Laying it on a little thick there, "Your Majesty, really. I find bluntness best." Mirelia was putting on a show for his sake, doing her best to build his reputation and, likewise, enamor the people to him. He was no actor, but surely he could play the part. How strong could it be? Rather than sketch one of those awful courtly bows he'd seen back in the castle, he stood tall and thumped a fist against his knee. "I accept this responsibility. Leave it to me." He raised his voice for all to hear. "I won't let you down." A ripple of approval flowed through the crowd for the most part. They respected his spirit if nothing else. It wasn't enough to win over everyone and probably wouldn't sway those truly entrenched against him, but it would go a long way to easing the hearts and minds of those who'd been on the fence. He could still feel some animosity from a number of them, but it was better than nothing. "Well said, my hero." Mirelia must have thought so as well, for she raised a hand into the silence. She favored him with a warm smile that had his heart racing. "But we cannot expect you to fight alone." That was her angle. All right, she was outright advertising it now. "We are looking for capable warriors who might join us in the battles against the waves to come." She turned back to the crowd, the picture of decorum once more. "Be you of skilled hand or steady heart, all are welcome." A ripple of excitement passed through the villagers. "Anyone who thinks themselves worthy of this task, step forward, pick me." Rafana's hand speared into the air. Raphtalia's timid arm joined it only a few moments later. Naruto ignored them, keeping his gaze above their heads. "Anyone?" Me. Rafana didn't falter. The little demi-human frantically hopped in place. "Me, do not make eye contact." "No takers, then?" "I volunteer as tribute." Tribute denied. Naruto crossed both arms in the shape of an X. "Go home, Rafana." "Oh, why not?" "You're much too young." "Hold a moment." Mirelia laid a hand on his arm. "Her proposal has merit." "What?" Naruto rounded on her, incredulous. "No, you can't be serious. She's just a child." The queen didn't falter under his baffled gaze. "If she has the consent of her parents, then why not?" Judging by the twitch of her ears and her determined expression, Rafana must have heard her. "I'll get it." He watched Raphtalia scamper off after her with a sigh. Mirelia caught it. "You disagree with this?" "Of course I do." An ember of anger stirred in his eye. "I learned how to fight when I wasn't much older than her." "Then why?" "Because." His temper finally spiked as faced her with a snarl. "Children should not be soldiers." "Oh." She blinked, somewhat taken aback by his sudden outburst. "You feel strongly about this, don't you?" I do." His anger faded as quickly as it came and he looked away, one hand over his face. "Kids shouldn't have to fight. Looking back, that was something my village made us do at her age. We were learning to throw kunai and shuriken and human-shaped targets." He'd been blinded at the time. Naive even. "By the time I was a genin, people were actively trying to kill me whenever I went out on missions." "Was it that bad?" "You have no idea." Bitter laughter bubbled out of him. "Remind me to tell you about the Chunin exams." Orochimaru had made that test a nightmare, but the past was the past and he'd rather not dwell on it. "In any case, I won't have her fighting on the front lines. You needn't worry there." Once more she assailed him with sweet, sweet logic. Demihuans grow very quickly as they gain levels, both mentally and physically. He squinted her way. Do that. You could have led with that, I tried. You did not give me a chance. I wince. 3. Do not be. It's fine. She patted his arm to mollify him, but her glare was stern. A relationship is a two-way street. Disagreements are bound to occur from time to time. I do not expect you to cater to me any more than I would you. If you disagree with something I do, tell me. As I shall you. Mirelia, flirting aside, we could use someone with Rifana's enthusiasm, not you too, Kurama. He grumbled a moment more before deciding. Fine, but only her, and only as support for now. Don't feel right taking kids into battle. Realizing the battle was lost, he turned back to face Mirelia once more. I'd like to have a look at the other provinces before we head back. Maybe he'd get lucky and Rifana's enthusiasm would cool in his absence. We can leave this place to Eclair and the Cleanese for a few days, pick up Rifana if she gets permission maybe. How's that sound? Mirelia nodded. I don't see why not. Was this going to be the end of her? Rishia Ivyred couldn't think of a worse way to go. They'd thrown her in a cell, locked her up, and thrown away the key. That wretched noble. He'd done this. Ruined her parents. And for what? Well, fame. Power. Father lay dead in a pool of his own blood back at the farmhouse. Mother had already been ruined by that pig. She would be next. She just knew it. It wasn't fair. What had she done to deserve this? What had any of them? Maybe someone would find her. The kingdom had to know about someone like this. Surely they wouldn't let this tragedy stand. The door creaked open and her thoughts turned to ash. It was to be her turn then. Dumont was a particularly gravid man even for a noble, bordering on grotesque. Certainly ugly too, for he wore a mask to hide his ruined face. She loathed him. If only she had run when she was told. If only she were stronger. If only she had fought. If only. She hated those words almost as much as she hated herself. Oh, her tormentor cooed, rubbing his fat fingers together. Is that a spark I see in our little rabbit's eyes? I won't give you what you want. No, I suppose you won't. Hendrik. Dispose of her. One of his men stepped forward. Any last words? She grit her teeth. Something tore deep inside her. I want you to burst you Sinuva. Something struck her, sending her world spinning. BLD spattered her face. It wasn't hers. Rishia blinked down at the bloody boots before her. Boots had held the steaming remains of what had once been legs. It was the door, she realized. Someone had struck it, sent it flying across the room and right into him. The results spoke for themselves. All that remained of her killer was a grisly red stain on the wall. Even that steamed, the BLD superheated by the force of the sudden implosion. Footsteps echoed outside in the dimly lit cell. Dumont stumbled back, eyes wide. What is the meaning of this? Meaning? A blond man walked through the gap, blue eyes ablaze. He was garbed in light armor, a strange orange creature sitting atop his shoulder. I think that's quite clear. What's this? An intruder? In my home. Marcus, kill him. A fist swung out. The man splattered the wall. Rishia Ivyred was not a brave girl. But the man before her undoubtedly was. Dumont was not. Why, you can't kill me. You have no proof of anything. Nothing at all. He stepped forth. You're right. He pivoted in place to address the noble before him, blue eyes flashing like fire. A good man would take you in, question you, prove your guilt. Unfortunately for you, I have all the proof I need. Right here. He jerked a thumb over his shoulder, uncaring as she clung to his coat to him in a vain attempt to preserve her decency. You locked this girl away. And for what? Your own selfish desires. You would have had your way with her if I hadn't come along. No, don't respond. Your silence is all the answer I need here. His body glowed gold. If you acknowledge any god, start praying. No. Silence reigned supreme. No. The blonde man tilted his head. No prayers. Amber. The creature atop his shoulder perked up. You can eat now. The Uan monster leaped forward and suddenly it wasn't a Uan at all, but a person, lunging forward. One of Dumont's remaining guards swung at her with a heavy truncheon, only for the blow to bounce off. His strike went wide, His only reward an annoyed whine from the girl he'd tried to kill. "Hey, that hurt," the man recoiled. "What the devil are you?" "I'm not a devil." The grinning held out a hand, letting it drip red. "I'm a slime." She was joking, surely. There was just no way a little girl like this could possibly be God's. Her body burst into red goo and grabbed the man. Consumed him. He vanished with a scream. Everything dissolved into chaos after that. Legends often have humble beginnings. You are no exception. "Not so meek." Interlude. "Found another girl, did you?" Heat seared through the back of Naruto's neck. "It's not like that." Mirelia hummed and didn't look up from her book, not even when he plunked down beside her on the bed, wanting to warm himself by the fire. She must have sensed his presence too, because the very second he sat beside her, she leaned into him and laid her head against his shoulder. In doing so, she inadvertently allowed him to get a glimpse at her so-called book. She clearly seemed to be writing in that book, so it couldn't be one. Why scribble in it? "I'm sure you just happened upon young Rishia and you, kind soul that you are, decided to take her under her wing. She has you there." "Yeah, that about sounds right. Why are you writing in that thing?" Lively violet eyes flitted up to meet his at the last. "This is a journal, if you must now. Someone must record your journey after all. You hardly have a bard to do, idiot." Kurama chuckled in the back of his head even as he scowled. "I am not recruiting a bard." Her eyes sparkled with dark mirth. "You say that now, beloved?" But Naruto's brow shot into his hair. "That word again." "Oh." Mirelia blinked and touched 3 fingers to her lips in surprise, a faint hint of pink dusting her cheeks. "Pardon me. I was enjoying myself a little too much and it slipped out. I'll not say it again." "Beloved." She'd said it before, but now it held more weight. Strange how one little word can make your heart race. No one had ever called him that before. Not once. Not in his world, and certainly not in this one. Not for the first time he found himself wondering exactly what Mirelia was to him. Eclair he could at least understand. She got terribly flustered when it came to any form of intimacy, but the queen seemed to genuinely delight in drawing a reaction out of him. "No," he decided, "it's fine. I like it." "Is that so?" She closed her journal with a soft smile and set the tome beside the bed. "Now about this new BLD of yours." Her hand sought his, fingertips threading through his own. "You rescued her from those awful men, yes?" Naruto felt his jaw clench. Monsters in men's clothing, more like. They and the world were well to be rid of their ilk. "I did." He nodded. "She went straight to sleep after Amber and I bailed her out." "I'm not surprised." Mirelia thumbed her chin, eyes gleaming in the low light. "She's likely still a little rattled after losing her parents, the poor dear." "Did you invite her to join her party perchance?" He had. It was all too easy to extend an offer after rescuing her. There hadn't been anything left of her tormentors. Amber saw to that. Rishia had jumped at the chance to leave her home behind, an opportunity to cast the specters of her pasts aside and run away from it all. With this thought in mind, he lifted his chin and nodded, bracing himself for some semblance of anger. Mirelia might be the sort to share every now and again, but if he kept drawing people to himself like this, well, any sane person would start to feel a little jealous. "Excellent." Mirelia jumped him with a happy smile, driving him down to the bed. "I knew you would." He'd almost forgotten. This queen was far from sane. "You're not angry?" "My dearest of heroes, why ever would I be angry?" Mirelia rolled over and sat atop him, all but straddling his hips with her own. Her smile was warm as she leaned down and nuzzled his neck, delivering a swift peck of the lips to his cheek as she did. "It falls to you to recruit members to your party." She began to grind herself against him, distracting him with delicious friction. "If I can but assist in some small way, oh," she gasped out the last word as he gripped her by the hips and pressed up against her. "Not so small after all. How could I forget?" A sigh wormed its way out of him at the last. "You're insatiable." Her grin grew lascivious. "You didn't complain last time. You dragged me into a I've still heard no complaints." She dipped her head down and kissed him softly, lips lingering on his. "But we are alone tonight." Her breath was warm on his face, smelling faintly of berries, her body of some faint sweet perfume he couldn't recognize. No éclair to look after, no third partner, no one to bother us, no one to interfere. Another embrace and he felt her lips curl against his. Is it any wonder that I want you all to myself this time? Greedy. She bit his neck. You love it. He really did. The realization something sparked in him. He surged up and deepened the embrace. One Mirelia heartily returned, fingers fumbling at his trousers even as his own hands tore her nightgown away. This time, he didn't let her take the initiative from him. When she tried to pin him, he pivoted and wrestled her down and locking her to the bed. Held her there now, uncaring of the tortured noise the wooden frame made. I'll let the DMN thing break. They'd buy a new one. Mirelia's long legs wrapped around his waist as she drew him closer, her nails raking against his back. In a matter of moments they fell into a comfortable rhythm. This time, Mirelia didn't deign to be quiet. She hollered his name to the heavens. No one saw Rishia. No one noticed her peeking in just outside the tent. Her legs rubbed together restlessly as she squirmed in place. Her savior already had someone. Not just someone but the queen. It just wasn't fair. She'd wanted no, she had hop-ed it didn't matter now. Or did it? She'd overheard their words. If only she could be half as bold. Could you? Post-coital bliss was a wonderful thing. In the moments after making love your mind went beautifully blank, all the cares of the world fell away and you could just be. No thoughts, no cares, just the simple pleasure of having a warm partner beside you, being pleasantly sore and content. No need to worry about what tomorrow might bring, or even the day afterward. No past or future, just the present. Simple coexistence. Nothing more, nothing less. A man could get addicted to that. Naruto closed his eyes and luxuriated in it. Even now he was keenly Mirelia's body nestling against his, skin to skin, her every curve pressing wantonly into his side. Her lips ghosted across his neck as she snuggled closer and he absently ran a hand over her flank to draw her closer. This felt good more than that, this felt right, downright relaxing even. He imagined the king miserable bedridden wretch that he was gnashing his teeth at the sight of them, powerless to do anything about it. Of course, that was assuming he still lived. Mirelia had said the poison wouldn't kill him, but the thought of miserable wretch suffering brought him more relief than killing 1,000 monsters. As stated, he tries to take our life, we take his wife. Kurama really could be a vicious BSRD sometimes. Not that he minded, we still need to get back to Luralona village. And then Mirelia's finger traced her ziti, reminding him of his duty. The wave will land there soon. He groaned. We do, don't we? We do. She giggled. I dare say Rafana's answer won't have changed. You might even have little Raftalia tagging along. No, no, no. He drew her close with one hand and wagged a finger at her with the other. One is enough. I've already got plenty of misfits. Mirelia tilted her head. And do you count me among them? I'm starting to think I should. Amber yawned blearily from her bed in the corner. Sir, what's a misfit? Naruto laughed and settled back down. Not you, sweetie, you're all right. Rishia ambushed him on the morning march. In all fairness, her determination actually impressed Naruto. He'd expected her to hide away a while longer to stay in mourning, not to approach him outright. Yet here she was, standing beside him, gripping his sleeve for dear life. More fool he for walking beside Mirelia's carriage, he supposed. She'd suggested he make himself visible to the troops and he'd agreed handily at the time, not wanting to spend another instant in that bloody box. Motion sickness wasn't something he wanted to experience a second time. Talking to a traumatized girl seemed a fair trade-off by comparison. Did you need something? She stared up at him for a long moment, gathering her wits. Then, I want to be strong like you teach me, alright. His assent clearly surprised her, judging by her expression. We'll start with your footwork once we make it to the village. Wait. She blinked rapidly, not at all prepared for his response. Just like that. Just like that. He ruffled the poor girl's hair. Walk with me. Rishia fell into step with him all too easily, all but shadowing him. Poor girl. She was latching on strong and he didn't have the heart to push her away. On a whim he waved a hand and conjured his status screen as they walked. He didn't miss the little message in the corner of his visage. Rishia had been listed as tamed, much to his consternation. But Because he got her away from those awful people. Because he saved her life. At least Claire made sense he'd bested her in a duel. Apparently saving people counted as well. He was still trying to figure out this whole level business, let alone his skills worse. He'd gained a new one just the other day that didn't make a LCK of sense. Fortify. He squinted at the holographic screen before him. The hell does that mean? Would you like to apply? There it was, that blasted voice again. On a whim he pressed it. He felt a faint tingle in his skin. Nothing more. Don't feel all that different. A secondary screen popped up before him. Would you like to fortify party member Rishia? Naruto considered the screen before him. That sounds useful. Wonder what happens if I Rishia jolted beside him with a startled squeak. What did you just do? Oops, he winced. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to scare you. Her eyes seemed a bit brighter somehow. Why, my lord, a guard hallooed, distracting him. We're nearly there. Thank the log for distractions. He could see Luralona village now, only a few miles down the road. It had changed in his absence. What was once a sleepy little village was well on its way to becoming a proper fortress in its time. His clones had been busy indeed. Not only had helped to erect proper walls and ditches, but there were archers upon the former, and he could see the latter filled with spikes. Many a man and woman drilled with spears as well as shields just outside the walls. He spied a head of pink hair near them and knew Claire had kept her word. Good girl. Maybe the demi-humans weren't truly ready for the wave, but they were prepared as they'd ever be. His heart kicked a little against his city at the thought. He wanted to defend this world. No, he felt responsible for it. The people here good and kind for he most part. Without him they would all die when the wave came. He'd done what he could, spread packs of shadow clones far and wide, but it was here that the hammer would strike the hardest. He couldn't quite say why he knew that, only that he did. Call it a feeling. Rifana had surely changed her mind by now. Surely she must have, right? There's no point in waiting. A soft peal of laughter reached his ears. Elia must have disembarked from her carriage when he wasn't looking. Go on. They're waiting for you. He supposed they were. Someone screamed. Naruto jerked around, startled by the cry. He looked up. Saw the sky, the ghastly swirls of light dancing within. Please tell me that's some kind of weird storm. No. For the first time since he'd met her, Elia sounded genuinely afraid. That those are the signs of the wave. Why now? Though we had more time, don't worry, I've got this. He moved with sinuous grace, raising a hand. It isn't that simple. She grabbed at his sleeve, drawing him back. You'll need to defeat the strongest monsters that spawns, and an earth-rattling roar pierced the sky. Everyone looked up as one. A massive shadow fell over them. And then death reigned from above. It only took him a minute. Barely 60 seconds to accomplish his goal. That was all he needed to save everyone. Do you understand now? In that first wave, the beast hero made his mark upon our world. That is the man you have made your enemy. May the gods have mercy on you, for he shall not. A warning. Legends come in waves. Incoming. Naruto never heard who said it exactly, only that someone saw the dragon and all hell broke loose. He was too busy bringing both arms up, palmed Slade to conjure Kuramand, defend everyone from the beast's breath. To pay it any heed. Flame burst down and roiled harmlessly against golden light as his old friend crouched over them. Shrouded by light as he was, he didn't get the best look at the creature above. It was large with glistening black scales and frightful red eyes. That was all he had time to see before he spat a half-formed tailed beast bomb upward with a snarl. That's how he likes it when we fight fire with fire. Not very much at all apparently, although his hastily made attack did little more than clip the beast in the shockwave that followed sent it winging backwards with a pained squeal. Anything else would have been blown clear out the sky outright. Instead, the enraged WM retreated with an outraged cry into the cloud-ridden skies and vanished from sight. After it, Mirelia's voice rang out after him. That must be the boss monster. If you kill it, the wave ends. That brief moment of inattention on his part cost him dearly because the wave did not wait for him. It barreled onward as he feared it would. Thankfully, they still had time, precious seconds in which to act. In that regard, the precious preparations he'd made back in Luralona village had paid dividends. The defenders were holding thanks to the clones he'd left, if only just. No one had died yet. But if he went after the dragon, they would. They're doomed, Rishia despaired at his side. There's no way we can get there in time, Kurama scoffed in his head, disparaging the doubtful girl. Never say never. Even so, don't be such a worrywart. Naruto reached to the side knowing Mirelia wouldn't let him down. Would you hold Amber for me? The girl granted him a fearsome pout. Oh, but I wanted to fight. His queen patted her head. This is a little too high level for you. Don't worry. There will be plenty of time to learn. The slime girl kicked sullenly with a little whine but otherwise didn't protest, which gave him a chance to glance at the newest member of his party. Rishia. Boys. She straightened up and all but squeaked out the word under his gaze. Did you need something, beast hero? They'd have to work on that confidence of hers under pressure. Earlier you said you wanted to see what a hero was, right? She nodded slowly, not quite comprehending. I did watch closely now. And don't blink. Then he moved. To the naked eye, time seemed to stop as all the colors of the world faded to gray. Every monster's defender and companion ceased moving in his mind's eye. Even Mirelia and Rishia, who had been following so closely in his wake a second ago, were no longer moving for him. Naruto was sure they could still see him, but they probably wouldn't be able to process most of what was about to happen. He didn't pay that thought any heed. He was already in motion, moving, surging forward. 0.2 of a second. Less than a blink. A single sliver of eternity. That was how long it took to close the gap between him and his prey, bridge the distance, and kill hundreds. He didn't bother trying to tame the beasts, wasn't even sure they could. These creatures were trying to kill the people. His people. He'd trained them, taught them, protected them, and now they were screaming for aid. And so he ran. He mowed the monsters down as one would fruit through a blender. Did this world have those? And kept going, moving on to the next. Another 0.2 of a second now. He'd reached the halfway point. Golden chakra arms burst from his back in a grim parody of a demonic Ashura, each tethered to his will. He had but to think and they acted, rending, ripping, reaping any enemy reach. Level up. BLD spattered across his face, staining his right cheek an ugly shade of scarlet. He snarled and moved on to his next victim. Level up. Stringing insects, undead knights, giant lumbering creatures. Didn't matter what they were. They died. Level up. He tore through them all. Level up, and the voice just kept chiming. It even became exasperated. Please stop leveling up. 0.6 of a second now, and still he didn't stop. Those golden hands simultaneously slew every monster he saw while saving everyone in sight, anyone he could sense. Single. So, he snatched a babe from a wolf's giant's jaws before they could clamp down, plucked a man from the beneath the foot of a giant, healed a mother with a gut wound, then flowed onto the next person who needed him. On and on he went, duplicating himself as he went, constantly splitting his attention between dozens, no hundreds of clones until his head ached and his skull threatened to burst. No one dies, nobody dies, absolutely no one dies here today, not on my watch. Time began to unwind around him, everything was moving again now, but slowly, oh so slowly. He felt more than a few clones pop and their memories rush into him. It only made him fight ever harder. No deaths. Even a single casualty here was unacceptable because he should have been here, should have been ready for this, should have done so much more. 0.8 and someone screamed. He pivoted so strong the ground burst beneath his feet. He knew those voices. Rafana, Raftalia, where they're just to the right by the fences. One of them was covered in BLD, not hers. The other was driving a knife down into the skull of an undead soldier. Another reared up behind them, but neither noticed, busy as they were. He did, grabbed it by the face, stove its head in against a wooden pole, grabbed the girls one to each arm and blurred back to safety. He didn't so much drop them as he did toss them into a bale of hay. FLCK of his hand conjured 3 clones, to which jabbed a finger at them with a snarl, baring his teeth. Guard them. He didn't pause to see if the words took and blitzed away again. Rif Anna beamed up at the swirling sky as she plunked down on the half-bale with a pleased sigh. Raftalia crashed down atop her with a dazed groan, eyes spinning in her head. Rif Anna only laughed. That settled it. Her mind was made up. Come rain or shine, hell or high water, life or death, I am so following that guy. What is this? Eclair cut a monster in twine. I feel stronger. Why is that, I wonder? No, more than that, she felt good. Really good. And her face felt so very warm. Someone was laughing. It was her. Rishia gripped her head as she stomped down on a monster's skull. The noise only made her headache worse. She couldn't think. Couldn't focus. Her breath came in fierce little pants as she slumped against a wall. She could feel Naruto's presence even from here. Gone was the gentle hero who'd saved her. He was living up to his moniker as the beast hero, all that and more, now a wild beast that would kill you just for looking its way. Breathe. She had to breathe. It was okay to breathe, right? He wouldn't kill her if she breathed, right? Where was the DMN dragon? He hadn't seen it since he hurt the DMN thing. Had he scared it off with his tailed beast bomb back there? No, it was somewhere above in the clouds, far out of reach. He could sense it way up there, nursing its wound. Deal with it later. Enemy. A giant two-headed dog lunged at him, twin jaws slavering, forcing him to catch each with both hands. It snapped at him, to no avail. He'd only just begun to contemplate the idea of tearing it in half when Eclair swept in out of nowhere from the side and severed its heads with her sword. She was gone before he could even think to thank her, flinging herself at the next enemy with a maddened giggle. She looked crazed. More than that, she was smiling. But Berserker activated. A screen flashed over his eyes as he gazed at the girl's rapidly receding form. Party member has temporary heightened strength and invulnerability to pain at cost of sanity. Gotta watch that. He felt strange too. Come to think of it, no, think about that later. Couldn't stop. Mustn't stop. He stepped over the canine's corpse and looked for his next target, eyes aglow. A serpent jumped him, fangs bared for his shoulder. He drove a fist backward without looking, rending it a pulpy mass at his feet. Next, an undead giant accepted his challenge and brought its club smashing down on its head. Said club shattered, as did the arm holding it, followed by the rest of the abomination as he blitzed through it. Don't stop. I can't stop. They'll die if I stop. He didn't even notice how many he had must have saved now, nor how many he'd killed. He'd long since lost count. He found the next swarm and mowed them down at speed, tearing out throats, slashing down with fingers hooked into claws. No, wait, those were actual claws sprouting from his fingernails. A brief bleat of confusion flashed through his mind. Was that one of the perks he'd gained? Everything else felt fine. Didn't matter. Had to run. Had to move. Each second was another in which one of his clones popped. He had to be fast. A dozen raisin shurikens flashed out and devastated the bulk of the horde. Faster. He vaulted atop a manticorngi, a pair of guardsmen, tore off its horns and drove them down into its eyes. The beast crumpled with a yowl and he rode its corpse to the ground before kicking it at another squad of undead. From there he leaped over the corpse and barreled into them, fingers flashing as he blitzed past. Their rotten remains crumbled to the floor and he didn't care because there were more to fight. More to kill, to slaughter and sunder. Fastest his eyes flked 9 different directions and 9 enemies dropped dead not a second later. From there he found his next victims. Why were they running away? Didn't matter. They attacked the village. They die. There could be no other answer for this trespass. A single leap brought him back to the broken gate, another had him crashing down on an undead's ribs. His fist scythed down and the ground burst. Dry dust spattered his face. A sword stabbed into his golden back, only to shatter. He sealked his tongue and writhed upright, bringing himself face to face with his attacker. Blank red eyes stared back at him. No, not so blank. He realized he could feel the bleeding terror in its gaze. Even mindless monsters could feel fear. He swept their spindly legs and stomped down, caving in their exposed ribs with an awful crack. The undead groaned woodenly. Let me ask you something. He leered down at them. Can a creature like yourself experience fear? It clawed wildly at his leg, to no avail. Bone alone could not pierce his cloak. He heard the rattle of armor and bone as more rushed him. But he wasn't satisfied yet. Let's find out. Whirling, he brought his hands together in a cataclysmic clap and conjured a shockwave, flattening the lot of them. The defenders gave a ragged cheer from the rooftops. He barely heard it. Not enough. This wasn't nearly enough for him. Where was the challenge? Where was the thrill? Where was a proper enemy to fight? He whirled on one heel, searching for his next target in vain. Slim arms closed around him from behind. Something warm, soft, and infinitely yielding pressed into his back. "Breathe, beloved." A familiar voice crooned in his ear. "You need to breathe." Naruto paused. Had he not been breathing this entire time? With an effort, he forced himself to inhale. Reality rushed back. Countless aches and pains returned with all the colors of the world, bringing sight, sense, and sanity with them. He blinked, feeling somewhat ashamed upon realizing there were no more monsters to say. Although the sky still swam with the strange colors of the wave overhead, he'd slain most of the monsters it brought to bear and was left covered in their blood, dust, and debris. Someone wiped his face with a damp cloth, cleaning it. He let them, squinting a little as his double vision centered itself. A full minute had elapsed. "There you are, my hero." Mirelia's face swam into focus mere moments before she delivered a quick peck to his lips. "Welcome back." Amber hopped down and squeezed his leg for all she was worth. "Don't do that again, you were scary." Naruto winced despite himself. "Was I?" Rishia nodded tremulously. He opened his mouth to reply further, only to choke a little as fatigue crashed down on him. He'd never run so fast in his entire life, never pushed himself so far, so strong, so fast without rest. Whatever his upper limit was, he'd gone crashing right through it, and he felt it now. Everything ached. He'd be right as rain once Kurama sped his regeneration along. "You're welcome for that, by the way." Speed threshold increased. The voice informed him primly. "Congratulations." He rolled his eyes. "Thanks ever so much. You brought us a reprieve, but it's not enough." She dabbed his chin one last time with a sigh. "They'll keep coming until you kill the boss monster." Back there was that really a dragon. If it was indeed a dragon, he was glad he hadn't killed it outright. Ha always wanted to wrestle one of those. Fight. Not kill. I mean, hey, he clasped both hands behind his head. He's not harming anyone up there. Come on, a dragon that's so metal. Enough of that. You have a speech to make. I do. Oi, no need to drag me. In short order, she brought him to the town square where the garrison had gathered. He was pleased to see everyone there and accounted for. Some had injuries, of course, but not a single casualty to speak of. His clones had held the line well, and these people were clearly thriving under the training regiment he'd put them through. They were battered, but not beaten, and awaiting his orders. Still, that was a big crowd. And they were all looking to him, now. Kurama gave him a jab. "Say something." "I ain't good with speeches, not with this many people." "Fine. SW with me real quick. I'll handle this one." "What?" He recoiled, made a little sullen by the lack of faith. "But I've been around for centuries. I know a thing or two when it comes to speeches." "And you're exhausted." He winced despite himself. "Yeah, I don't know. You're not gonna make me say anything stupid, are ya?" Just a stubby fee in his eyes flashed red, drawing a few curious sounds from those closest to him. Mirelia noticed right away, of course. She was far too sharp not to. Rishia squeaked at the sight. He certainly didn't miss the way Eclair gasped at his flank, nor the pleased noise Amber made from her perch on his shoulder. "Pretty colors." Kurama chortled a little. "Of course she'd find that pretty. People of Luralona village, hear me." His voice boomed out at the crowd. "Bravery isn't having no fear, bravery is having fear. But you do it anyway. That's what a hero does, no matter the odds. No matter the danger. Today, you are all heroes, you are all strong. This is your village, your lands." Behind them, the village gate shook as a fresh horde pounded against it. "Those bastards want to get in here and kill us, to kill you, your women, and your children. Are you going to let them?" A roar went up. Kurama grinned down at them. "Then stand your ground." He slammed a fist against his "Hold the line, fight." The dragon chose that moment to swoop down and flame them again. Swooping was bad. Very bad indeed, but not for Luralona village. Kurama barreled up into the beast with a cackle. Just like that, battle was joined once more. "He's not one of the four. Is he a demi-human? I don't see a weapon on him. Who is he?"